Carl Jung Explained, 12 Signs. Real healing has begun and you're no longer who you were. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when the ground beneath your carefully constructed world begins to shift, not with the violence of an earthquake, but with the gentle, inexorable persistence of water wearing away stone. You feel it first as a tremor of uncertainty, a hairline crack in the foundation of who you believed yourself to be. The fortress of ego that you have spent decades building, brick by brick, defense by defense, story by story, suddenly feels less solid than it once did. This is the beginning of the great dissolving, though you may not recognize it as such. The rational mind, ever vigilant in its role as guardian of the known, whispers warnings about this growing sense of dissolution. It speaks of danger, of losing yourself, of falling into an abyss from which there may be no return. But the deeper wisdom of the psyche knows differently. This is not destruction. This is sacred undoing, the first movement in the symphony of transformation that will carry you toward your authentic self. The persona, that carefully crafted mask you wear for the world, begins to feel heavy upon your face. Where once it fit like a second skin, providing comfort and identity in social spaces, now it chafes and constrains. You notice moments when you catch yourself acting a role that no longer feels true, speaking words that taste foreign in your mouth, maintaining relationships that drain rather than nourish your deepest being. The social self that once provided security now feels like a prison, and you begin to sense the presence of something larger moving beneath its surface. In the quiet hours when the world's demands recede, and you are left alone with the whispers of your inner landscape, you feel it most acutely. This sense that the old ways of being are dissolving like salt in water. The beliefs that once anchored you to solid ground begin to feel less certain. The goals that once drove you forward lose their compelling urgency. The relationships that once defined your place in the world's intricate web start to shift and change, as if responding to some invisible current flowing beneath the surface of consciousness. This dissolution does not announce itself with fanfare. It arrives like morning mist, so gradual that you may not notice its presence until you find yourself walking through a landscape transformed by its ethereal touch. The familiar landmarks of your inner world, those psychological reference points that once provided orientation and meaning, begin to waver and blur. What seemed permanent reveals itself as temporary. What appeared solid shows its essentially fluid nature. The ego mind, trained in the art of control and prediction, experiences this dissolution as a profound threat. It marshals its forces, attempting to rebuild the walls that are crumbling, to reinforce the structures that are softening, to restore the clarity that is growing beautifully, mysteriously dim. But this is like trying to hold water in your cupped hands. The tighter you grasp, the more quickly it slips through your fingers. The old ways of forcing and controlling reveal their limitations in the face of this deeper transformation. You may find yourself grieving during this time, mourning the loss of certainties that once felt absolute. The clear-cut boundaries between right and wrong begin to blur into shades of gray and silver. The simple answers that once satisfied now feel inadequate to the complexity of your expanding awareness. The black and white thinking that provided such comfortable clarity gives way to a more nuanced understanding that embraces paradox and contradiction as essential elements of truth. This is the ego's dark night, its passage through the valley of shadows where all its cherished certainties are called into question. The rational mind, accustomed to being the ultimate arbiter of reality, finds itself confronted by experiences that defy its categories and explanations. Dreams become more vivid and strange. Intuitions arise unbidden from depths you didn't know you possessed. Synchronicities begin to appear with increasing frequency, as if the universe itself is conspiring to demonstrate the inadequacy of purely rational explanations. The personality structures that once felt so essential to your identity, your professional role, your family position, your social affiliations, begin to feel less central to who you truly are. Like clothes that no longer fit, they hang loosely around your expanding sense of self. You may find yourself questioning not just what you do, but who you are beneath all the doing. The verb of your existence, the constant activity and striving that once defined your worth, gives way to a deeper inquiry into the noun of your being, the essential self that exists prior to all achievements and accomplishments. In relationships, this dissolution manifests as a growing authenticity that both attracts and disturbs others. Where you once automatically adjusted yourself to meet expectations, you now find yourself speaking truths that surprise even you. The social scripts that once guided your interactions begin to feel constraining and false. You say, "I don't know," more frequently, not from ignorance, but from a growing appreciation for the mystery that underlies all knowing. This honesty can be unsettling to those who knew you in your more defended state, but it also creates space for deeper, more genuine connections to emerge. The great dissolving touches every aspect of your existence, but it does so with the wisdom of the unconscious, which knows precisely what needs to be released and what needs to be preserved. Like a master sculptor who sees the finished statue within the rough marble and removes only what obscures the essential form, this process of dissolution removes only what is false, what is borrowed, what is not authentically yours. The core of who you are, that essential self that has always been present beneath the layers of conditioning, remains untouched and inviolate. This is where the spiritual dimension of the dissolution becomes most apparent. What is dissolving is not your true nature, but the accumulated debris of false identities, borrowed beliefs, and imposed expectations that have obscured your authentic being like silt clouding clear water. As these sediments settle and clear, what remains is the crystalline clarity of your essential self, that aspect of your being that has always been whole and complete, waiting patiently for recognition. The process often accelerates through periods of crisis or significant life transitions. The death of a loved one, the end of a marriage, the loss of a job, a serious illness. These events act as catalysts, dissolving the brittle shell of ego certainty and revealing the more flexible, resilient core of authentic being that lies beneath. What initially appears as breakdown reveals itself as breakthrough, as the rigid structures that no longer serve your growth are gently dissolved to make way for new forms of being. During this time, you may experience moments of profound disorientation, as if you are walking through a familiar landscape that has been rearranged in your sleep. The mental maps you have used to navigate your inner and outer worlds no longer seem to match the territory you are traversing. This is not a sign that you are losing your way. It is evidence that you are finally finding it. The old maps were drawn by others, based on their journeys, their insights, their limitations. Now you are being called to chart your own course through the wilderness of authentic being. The dissolution of old certainties creates space for new possibilities to emerge. Where there was once rigid dogma, there is now flexible wisdom. Where there was once fearful clinging, there is now curious letting go. Where there was once desperate grasping after external validation, there is now a growing sense of inner authority and authentic self-worth. The ego's frantic attempts to maintain control give way to a deeper trust in the wisdom of the self, that larger organizing principle within the psyche that Jung understood as the true center of psychological wholeness. This trust does not come easily to the ego mind, which has been conditioned to believe that relaxing vigilance leads inevitably to chaos and destruction. But the great dissolving teaches a different truth, that letting go of false control opens the door to authentic power, that releasing the need to know everything allows space for genuine wisdom to emerge, that surrendering the compulsive need to fix and change everything permits the natural healing intelligence of the psyche to do its work. As the old structures continue their gentle dissolution, you may notice that your relationship with time itself begins to shift. The urgent, linear time of the ego, always rushing toward future goals or clinging to past achievements, gives way to a more cyclical, seasonal understanding of temporal flow. You begin to sense the deeper rhythms that govern psychological growth, recognizing that there are times for active effort and times for patient waiting, times for expansion and times for contraction, times for speaking and times for listening to the subtle voices that arise from the depths of being. The great dissolving is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process, a continuous letting go of what no longer serves your deepest becoming. It is the psyche's natural way of composting outdated identities and belief systems, breaking them down into the rich soil from which new growth can emerge. Like autumn leaves that fall and decompose to nourish the roots of the tree, the dissolved elements of your former self become the foundation for whatever wants to be born through you. This process requires a fundamental reorientation of attention from the constant outward focus of ego consciousness to the receptive inward-turning awareness that can perceive the subtle movements of the self. Instead of always asking, "What should I do?" you begin to ask, "What wants to emerge through me?" Instead of forcing your will upon circumstances, you learn to align your actions with the deeper currents of meaning that flow through your life like underground streams. The dissolution also reveals the artificial nature of many of the boundaries that once seemed absolute and unchangeable. The rigid separation between conscious and unconscious, between self and other, between inner and outer worlds, begins to soften and become more permeable. You may find that you are more sensitive to the emotional atmospheres of the people and places around you, as if the protective barriers that once insulated you from the subtle influences of your environment have grown thinner and more transparent. This increased permeability can initially feel overwhelming, as if you are absorbing emotions and energies that don't belong to you. But with time and practice, you learn to distinguish between what is yours and what belongs to others, developing what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing energies in creative tension without being torn apart by their contradictions. The great dissolving ultimately reveals that what you took to be your solid, unchanging identity was actually more like a river than a stone, a continuous flow of experiences, thoughts, emotions, and sensations that creates the illusion of a fixed self through its very continuity. Recognizing this fluid nature of identity is both liberating and terrifying to the ego mind, which has invested tremendous energy in maintaining the fiction of a solid, permanent self. But as the dissolution continues, a deeper understanding emerges. You begin to realize that your true nature is not the constantly changing content of consciousness, the thoughts, emotions, and sensations that flow through your awareness, but the unchanging awareness itself, the clear space of consciousness in which all these experiences arise and pass away. This recognition marks a crucial turning point in the journey of individuation, the moment when the center of identity begins to shift from the ego to the self. The process is often accompanied by a sense of profound loneliness as you find yourself occupying a space between worlds, no longer fully identified with the old ways of being, but not yet established in the new. This is the liminal space of transformation, the threshold between what was and what is becoming. It is a sacred time that requires patience and trust as the psyche reorganizes itself around a new center of gravity. In this space of dissolution and reconstitution, you may discover capacities and potentials that were always present, but previously hidden beneath the dense layers of persona and ego identification. Creativity may begin to flow more freely as the critical voices that once censored your authentic expression lose their grip on your consciousness. Intuition may strengthen, providing guidance that bypasses the analytical mind's need for logical justification. Compassion may deepen as you recognize in others the same struggles and yearnings that you have experienced in your own journey toward wholeness. The great dissolving is ultimately an act of profound self-love, though it may not feel that way in the midst of its unfolding. It is the psyche's way of clearing away everything that obscures your true nature, creating space for your authentic self to emerge and express itself freely in the world. Like a gardener who prunes away dead branches to encourage new growth, this process removes only what no longer serves your highest unfolding. As this first movement of the great transformation draws to its close, you may sense something stirring in the depths, not the old ego trying to reassert itself, but something new and unprecedented beginning to take shape in the space that has been cleared. The dissolution that initially felt like an ending reveals itself as a beginning, the first movement in a larger symphony of becoming that will carry you ever deeper into the mystery of who you truly are beneath all the masks and defenses and borrowed identities. This is the promise held within the great dissolving, that what appears to be falling apart is actually falling into place, reorganizing itself according to a deeper pattern that was always present but previously obscured. The ego's careful constructions give way to the self's organic unfolding, as your life begins to flow from a source that is both uniquely yours and universally shared, both intimately personal and cosmically vast. The journey has begun, and there is no turning back, not because the path behind has been destroyed, but because the way forward has revealed itself to be so much more interesting, so much more alive, so much more true to who you actually are, beneath all the layers of who you thought you had to be. The great dissolving continues, patient and thorough, preparing the ground for whatever wants to be born through the sacred vessel of your awakening consciousness. In the wake of the great dissolving, as the familiar structures of identity continue their sacred crumbling, something unexpected begins to stir in the depths of your being. It emerges from the places you have spent a lifetime avoiding, those shadowed corners of the psyche where you banished everything deemed unacceptable, unworthily unlovable about yourself. What rises from these depths comes not as the monster you feared, but as a teacher bearing gifts wrapped in darkness, offerings that your conscious mind could never have anticipated. The shadow, that repository of all the qualities you rejected in yourself, has been waiting patiently in the underground chambers of your consciousness, growing strong in exile, developing capacities that your ego self disowned long ago. Like a forgotten child locked in the basement of the psyche, it has been knocking softly at the door of awareness, its presence felt as inexplicable attractions to what you claimed to despise, as dreams populated by figures who embodied everything you swore you were not, as moments of behavior that surprised and horrified your carefully maintained self-image. But now, as the ego's rigid defenses soften in the gentle acids of dissolution, the shadow finds new pathways to the surface. It does not come as an invader storming the gates of consciousness, but as an aspect of yourself that has always belonged, that was separated only by the artificial boundaries created through years of conditioning and societal pressure. The reunion begins hesitantly, like the meeting of estranged family members who barely recognize each other after decades of separation. You may first notice the shadow's presence as an uncomfortable fascination with qualities in others that trigger your strongest reactions. The person whose confidence you label as arrogance may be reflecting your own disowned power. The individual whose emotional expressiveness you judge as weakness may be mirroring your own rejected vulnerability. The one whose apparent selfishness offends your moral sensibilities may be showing you the healthy self-care you learned to suppress in childhood. What you resist most strongly in others often points directly toward what you have exiled from yourself. This recognition can be initially disturbing to the conscious mind, which has invested tremendous energy in maintaining its preferred self-image. The ego prefers to see itself as the hero of its own story, noble and virtuous, while projecting all negative qualities onto others or onto the external world. But the process of individuation demands a more honest reckoning with the totality of your being, including those aspects that don't fit comfortably within the narrow parameters of who you thought you were supposed to be. The shadow carries within it not just the negative qualities you rejected, but also positive potentials that were suppressed because they didn't align with your family's expectations, your culture's values, or your own limited understanding of acceptable behavior. The artist you buried beneath layers of practicality, the rebel you silenced in service of belonging, the mystic you dismissed as unrealistic. All these vital aspects of yourself have been waiting in the shadows, maintaining their vitality in exile, ready to contribute their unique gifts to your becoming whole. As you begin to acknowledge these disowned parts of yourself, the initial reaction is often shame or self-judgment. The critical voice that helped create the shadow in the first place rises up to condemn this newfound awareness, warning you that accepting these rejected aspects will lead to moral corruption or social rejection. But this is the voice of the superego, that internalized authority, that learned to suppress whatever threatened its vision of acceptability. The deeper wisdom of the self recognizes that wholeness cannot be achieved through rejection and suppression, but only through integration and conscious choice about how to express these previously hidden energies. The process of shadow integration is alchemical in nature, transforming what appeared to be base metal into gold. The very qualities that once seemed poisonous reveal their healing potential when brought into conscious relationship. Your suppressed anger, when consciously integrated, becomes the fuel for healthy boundaries and passionate advocacy for what matters most to you. Your disowned selfishness transforms into necessary self-care and the ability to know and honor your own needs. Your rejected vulnerability becomes the foundation for authentic intimacy and creative expression. This transformation doesn't happen through simple acceptance or indulgence of shadow impulses. Rather, it occurs through the conscious dialogue between ego and shadow, a careful negotiation that honors both the legitimate concerns of the conscious mind and the vital energy of the rejected aspects. Like a skilled diplomat facilitating peace talks between warring factions, consciousness learns to create space for previously antagonistic parts of the self to find common ground and mutual cooperation. The shadow often first reveals itself through projection, that unconscious mechanism by which we perceive in others what we cannot yet acknowledge in ourselves. But as awareness grows, these projections begin to withdraw, creating space for a more direct encounter with disowned aspects of your nature. This can manifest as sudden recognitions. I am capable of the very cruelty I condemn in others. Or, I contain the same capacity for deception that I judge so harshly when I see it in the world. These realizations, though initially uncomfortable, mark crucial moments of psychological integration. Dreams become particularly important during this phase of the journey, as the unconscious presents scenarios where shadow figures appear as allies rather than enemies. The dark stranger who once pursued you threateningly through nighttime landscapes may now appear as a guide, offering wisdom for the journey ahead. The wild animal that once terrorized your dream self may reveal itself as a powerful spirit ally, bringing instinctual wisdom and natural vitality to your conscious life. These dream encounters signal the beginning of a new relationship with previously rejected aspects of your psyche. The integration process is rarely smooth or linear. There are moments of regression when the old patterns of rejection and projection reassert themselves, when the familiar comfort of moral superiority proves temporarily more appealing than the challenging work of owning your full humanity. But each return to integration happens with greater awareness and skill as you develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing tendencies in creative tension without being torn apart by their contradictions. As shadow integration deepens, you may notice a curious shift in your relationships with others. The intense emotional reactions that once dominated your interactions begin to soften as you reclaim the projections you had placed on people around you. Individuals who once served as repositories for your disowned qualities are now free to be themselves rather than carriers of your unconscious material. This creates space for more authentic relationships based on who people actually are rather than on what psychological function they were serving in your internal drama. The process also brings a profound sense of relief, as energy that was previously tied up in maintaining defenses against the shadow is now available for creative and constructive purposes. The constant vigilance required to suppress unwanted aspects of yourself was exhausting, even when you weren't consciously aware of the effort involved. As these aspects are integrated, a natural vitality returns, like a river whose flow is restored when the dam that blocked it is finally removed. Your relationship with your own darkness also becomes more sophisticated and nuanced. Where once there was only rejection or identification, either completely denying shadow qualities or being completely overwhelmed by them, now there emerges a middle path of conscious relationship. You can acknowledge the presence of aggressive impulses without acting them out destructively. You can recognize selfish desires without being controlled by them. You can feel the pull of various shadow elements without losing your center or abandoning your values. This development of conscious relationship with the shadow is one of the great gifts of midlife and beyond, when the ego's defenses naturally begin to soften and the call toward wholeness becomes more compelling than the need for social approval. The persona, that carefully crafted mask designed to present an acceptable face to the world, no longer requires such rigorous maintenance. There is room now for more authentic self-expression, informed by a fuller knowledge of who you actually are beneath the layers of conditioning and expectation. The shadow's gifts extend beyond personal transformation to influence your relationship with the collective shadow of your culture, your family, your historical moment. As you develop the capacity to own your personal darkness, you also become less likely to project it onto groups of people who are different from you. The mechanisms that create scapegoating, prejudice, and collective projection become more visible as you recognize them operating in your own psyche. This awareness contributes to a more compassionate and nuanced understanding of human nature, both individually and collectively. There is a profound paradox embedded in shadow work. The more fully you acknowledge your capacity for what you consider negative qualities, the less likely you are to express them unconsciously and destructively. The person who admits their capacity for cruelty is often kinder than the one who sees themselves as incapable of causing harm. The individual who owns their potential for dishonesty often displays greater integrity than the one who prides themselves on always telling the truth. Conscious relationship with the shadow provides choice about how to express these energies constructively rather than being at their unconscious mercy. As integration progresses, you may discover that many of the qualities you spent years trying to develop in yourself were actually already present in shadow form, waiting for conscious recognition and refinement. The confidence you struggled to build through external achievements may have been there all along in the form of suppressed arrogance that needed only conscious modulation to become healthy self-assurance. The creativity you sought through various practices may have been present in the rebellious impulses you learned to suppress in childhood, needing only safe channels for expression. The shadow also carries cultural and ancestral material, the rejected aspects of your family lineage, the suppressed potentials of your ethnic or cultural background, the disowned elements of your historical moment. As you develop relationship with your personal shadow, you may find yourself also reclaiming valuable aspects of your heritage that were lost through assimilation, trauma, or cultural pressures. This can manifest as sudden interest in ancestral practices, unexpected connections to cultural traditions you had previously dismissed, or the emergence of capabilities that seem to arise from some deeper wellspring of inherited wisdom. The process of shadow integration is never fully complete, as new life circumstances continually reveal previously hidden aspects of your nature. Each major transition, each significant relationship, each encounter with unfamiliar situations has the potential to constellate shadow material that was dormant under previous conditions. But this ongoing revelation becomes less threatening as you develop trust in the process of integration, confidence in your ability to establish conscious relationship with whatever emerges from the depths. The gifts of the shadow work extend far beyond personal healing to influence your capacity for genuine service in the world. The person who has faced their own capacity for harm is often the most effective advocate for preventing harm to others. The individual who has integrated their own greed can speak authentically about the need for economic justice. The one who has acknowledged their own prejudices becomes a credible voice for inclusion and equity. Shadow integration doesn't create perfection, but it does create authenticity and the wisdom that comes from hard-earned self-knowledge. As this phase of the journey reaches its culmination, you may sense a profound shift in the quality of your inner landscape. Where once there was internal warfare between acceptable and unacceptable aspects of yourself, there is now something approaching peace, not the static peace of suppression, but the dynamic peace of integration. The various parts of your psyche begin to work together like members of an orchestra, each contributing their unique voice to a larger harmony that was impossible when any section was silenced or exiled. The shadow's gift ultimately reveals itself to be nothing less than the return of your full humanity, the reclamation of psychological territories that were lost through the necessary but limiting process of socialization. You are no longer divided against yourself, no longer requiring enormous amounts of energy to maintain the fiction of moral purity or psychological perfection. You are free to be human in all its complexity, darkness, and ultimate beauty. This integration creates a foundation for the next movement in the journey of individuation, as the psyche, now more whole and less defended, becomes available for even deeper communication with the unconscious realms. The ego, no longer rigidly separated from the shadow, becomes a more flexible and permeable structure, capable of receiving the symbolic communications that will soon begin arriving with increasing frequency and power. The stage is set for the unconscious to speak its ancient language of image and symbol, dreams and visions, as the journey toward wholeness continues to unfold through the mysterious workings of the transforming psyche. In the deepening twilight of transformation, as the ego's rigid boundaries continue their sacred softening and the shadow's gifts find their place in the expanding constellation of your being, something extraordinary begins to stir in the realm where consciousness meets the vast unknown. Your dreams, once perhaps dismissed as mere neurological housekeeping or random firings of a resting brain, begin to pulse with an intelligence and intentionality that cannot be ignored. They arrive now not as chaotic fragments of memory and desire, but as carefully crafted communications from the depths, speaking in a language older than words, more precise than logic, more truthful than the careful constructions of waking thought. The unconscious, sensing the growing receptivity of a psyche no longer rigidly defended against its wisdom, begins to increase the volume and clarity of its transmissions. What emerges from the nightly theater of sleep carries the unmistakable signature of the self, that organizing principle within the psyche that Jung recognized as the true architect of psychological wholeness. These are not the confused wanderings of a mind at rest, but the deliberate teachings of an inner wisdom that has been waiting patiently for the conscious personality to develop sufficient flexibility to receive its guidance. This shift in the quality and significance of your dream life often begins subtly, perhaps with an increased vividness that makes certain dreams linger in memory long after waking. Colors appear more saturated than anything experienced in ordinary consciousness. Emotions felt in the dream state carry an intensity and authenticity that can reshape your understanding of what you truly feel about the circumstances of your waking life. Conversations with dream figures possess a wisdom and insight that surprises your conscious mind, as if you are in dialogue with aspects of yourself that know far more than your waking personality has ever acknowledged. The landscape of these significant dreams often bears little resemblance to the familiar geography of your daily existence. You find yourself in ancient forests that pulse with archetypal significance, walking through cities that blend elements from different historical periods, entering buildings whose architecture defies the laws of physics, but perfectly embodies the structures of the psyche itself. These are not random scenic backdrops, but carefully chosen symbolic environments, each element precisely selected to convey meanings that bypass the analytical mind and speak directly to the soul's capacity for pattern recognition and intuitive understanding. Characters begin to appear in your dreams who carry the unmistakable presence of archetypal figures, not the literal representations of people from your personal history, though they may sometimes wear familiar faces, but emanations of the collective unconscious speaking through the particular imagery of your individual psyche. The wise old man or woman arrives bearing counsel that addresses not just your immediate concerns, but the deeper questions of meaning and purpose that may have been stirring beneath the surface of your conscious awareness. The divine child appears sometimes vulnerable and in need of protection, sometimes radiant with the promise of new life and creative potential. The anima or animus, those contrasexual figures that represent the bridge between conscious and unconscious, between known and unknown aspects of yourself, may begin to play increasingly prominent roles in your dream narratives. These figures often carry both allure and challenge, inviting you deeper into relationship with parts of yourself that have remained underdeveloped or unintegrated. They speak in the voice of your unlived life, calling attention to potentials that await actualization, to ways of being that your conscious personality has not yet learned to embody. The language these dreams speak bypasses the linear logic of rational thought, communicating instead through the more ancient grammar of symbol and metaphor, image and emotion. A house in a dream is never merely a house. It is the architecture of the psyche itself, with its many rooms representing different aspects of consciousness and unconsciousness, its basement pointing toward the depths of the shadow realm, its upper floors suggesting aspirations and spiritual potentials. Water appears not simply as H2O, but as the flowing medium of emotional life and unconscious content, sometimes crystal clear and life-giving, sometimes turbulent and threatening, sometimes vast and oceanic, suggesting the immensity of the collective unconscious itself. Animals in these dreams carry the wisdom of instinct and natural knowing, often appearing as guides or teachers who embody qualities that your civilized consciousness has lost or forgotten. The wolf brings the medicine of the wild self, the capacity for loyalty and fierce protection of what matters most. The eagle soars with the vision of higher perspective and spiritual aspiration. The snake speaks the ancient wisdom of transformation and healing, its ability to shed its skin offering a powerful metaphor for the psychological process of renewal and rebirth. Numbers, too, take on significance that transcends their mathematical functions, carrying the archetypal meanings that have been recognized across cultures and throughout history. 3 appears as the number of synthesis, of the child that emerges from the union of opposites. 4 manifests as the number of wholeness and stability, the quaternity that Jung saw as the natural structure of completeness in the psyche. 7 brings the energy of spiritual completion and the marriage of heaven and earth. The timing of significant dreams often corresponds with crucial moments in your outer life, arriving just when you need guidance for a difficult decision, comfort during a period of loss, or inspiration for a creative endeavor. But their timing also follows the deeper rhythms of psychological development, appearing when the psyche is ready for the next phase of growth, when consciousness has developed sufficient capacity to integrate the wisdom they carry, when the ego has achieved enough flexibility to receive their transformative influence without being overwhelmed or defensive. These dreams often carry a numinous quality, a sense of the sacred that cannot be explained but is unmistakably felt. You may wake from such dreams with tears on your cheeks, though you cannot fully articulate why. Or you may feel energized and expanded, as if you have been touched by something infinitely larger than your ordinary sense of self. The dream may fade in its specific details, but its emotional resonance and essential meaning continue to work within you, slowly reorganizing your understanding of yourself and your place in the larger pattern of existence. The boundary between sleeping and waking consciousness begins to grow more permeable as this process unfolds. Insights received in dreams begin to influence your waking choices and perspectives. Symbols encountered in the night theater of the unconscious start appearing in your daily life with meaningful synchronicity. The wisdom figures met in dreams may seem to offer guidance during waking moments of uncertainty or confusion. It is as if the artificial separation between conscious and unconscious, between sleeping and waking awareness, is being gently dissolved to allow for a more integrated and fluid relationship between these different modes of consciousness. This integration is facilitated by the practice of active engagement with dream content, not just remembering and recording dreams, but entering into ongoing dialogue with the images and figures they present. Jung's technique of active imagination becomes particularly valuable during this phase, allowing you to continue dream conversations in waking consciousness, to ask questions of dream figures and receive responses that carry the same numinous quality as the original dream encounter. Through this practice, the dream becomes not just a message received, but an ongoing conversation with the deeper layers of your own wisdom. The dreams of this period often carry themes of initiation and transformation, presenting scenarios where the dreamer must pass through various tests or challenges to reach a desired destination or achieve a specific goal. These are not random adventures, but carefully crafted initiatory experiences that mirror the psychological work of individuation. The obstacles encountered in the dream reflect internal barriers that need to be transcended. The allies met along the way represent resources and capacities within the psyche that are available to support the journey toward wholeness. Death and rebirth imagery becomes particularly prominent, though these symbolic deaths rarely represent literal mortality. Instead, they point toward the ego deaths necessary for psychological transformation, the need to release outgrown identities, to let go of limiting beliefs, to allow aspects of the personality that no longer serve your highest becoming to die so that new life can emerge. The dreamer may find themselves attending their own funeral, only to discover that what has died was never truly essential to their core identity. Or they may witness the death of familiar dream figures, understanding intuitively that these represent aspects of themselves that are ready to be transformed or transcended. Rebirth imagery often follows, sometimes immediately within the same dream, sometimes in subsequent dreams that clearly continue the same archetypal narrative. The dreamer may emerge from underground chambers into brilliant sunlight, or witness the birth of new life in various symbolic forms. These images carry the promise and energy of renewal, suggesting that the psychological death is not an ending but a transformation, not a loss but a liberation into a more authentic and expanded way of being. The dreams of this transformational period also frequently include encounters with luminous or transcendent imagery, brilliant lights that do not hurt the eyes, colors that don't exist in ordinary reality, sounds of indescribable beauty that heal something deep within the soul. These experiences point toward what Jung called the self, that transcendent center of the psyche that exists beyond the ego's limited perspective, but remains intimately connected to the personal journey of individuation. Such dreams often leave the dreamer with a profound sense of being loved and supported by something infinitely wise and compassionate, a knowing that the journey of transformation is held and guided by a benevolent intelligence that sees the larger pattern and purpose that the conscious mind cannot yet fully comprehend. Mathematical and geometric imagery may also appear with increasing frequency, reflecting the psyche's natural tendency to organize itself according to underlying patterns of wholeness and balance. Mandalas appear spontaneously in dreams, circular, often symmetrical patterns that Jung recognized as natural expressions of the self's organizing principle. These may manifest as flowers with perfect geometric petals, as architectural structures built around central organizing points, as cosmic images of planets and stars arranged in meaningful configurations. The dreamer often feels drawn to the center of these patterns, sensing that they represent not just aesthetic beauty, but maps of their own psychological wholeness. The emergence of this new dream language often coincides with increased synchronicities in waking life, as if the permeable boundary between inner and outer, between psyche and world, allows for a more fluid exchange of meaningful connections. A symbol encountered in a dream appears unexpectedly in a book you're reading, a song you hear, a conversation with a stranger. These synchronistic events carry the same numinous quality as the significant dreams, suggesting that the process of individuation involves not just internal psychological work, but a growing alignment with the meaningful patterns that Jung believed govern the relationship between consciousness and the objective world. As your facility with this symbolic language develops, you may find that the dreams begin to offer increasingly specific and practical guidance for the challenges and opportunities of your waking life. But this guidance rarely comes in the literal, direct form that the rational mind might prefer. Instead, it arrives wrapped in metaphor and symbol, requiring a process of translation and interpretation that engages your intuitive capacities and deepens your relationship with the unconscious wisdom that is guiding the transformation. The practice of working with these dreams becomes itself a form of active participation in the individuation process. Each dream recorded, each symbol contemplated, each dialogue with a dream figure strengthens the channel of communication between conscious and unconscious, between ego and self. The dreams become collaborators in the work of becoming whole, offering both the vision of what wholeness might look like and the specific next steps needed to move in that direction. This ongoing dialogue with the dream world also begins to influence the quality of your waking consciousness, bringing more symbolic awareness to everyday experiences. You begin to notice the archetypal patterns playing out in your relationships, the meaningful coincidences that point toward the deeper purposes underlying apparently random events, the symbolic significance of the challenges and opportunities that present themselves in your outer life. The boundary between dream and reality becomes less absolute as you recognize that both are expressions of the same underlying creative intelligence that is orchestrating your journey toward wholeness. As this phase of the transformation reaches its crescendo, you may receive what can only be called visionary dreams, experiences so rich in archetypal content, so clearly communicating the direction and purpose of your individual journey that they serve as guiding stars for years to come. These are the great dreams that indigenous peoples have always recognized as messages from the spirits, communications from the realm of the ancestors and the gods, transmissions of wisdom that transcend the boundaries of personal psychology to connect you with the larger patterns of meaning that give life its deepest significance. The unconscious, having established this clear channel of communication through the symbolic language of dreams, prepares now for the next movement in the great symphony of transformation. The psyche, more integrated after the gifts of shadow work, more receptive after learning to receive the wisdom of symbolic communication, stands ready for what may be the most challenging phase of the journey. The dismantling of the belief systems and worldviews that have provided meaning and orientation, but may now be revealed as too small to contain the expanding reality of who you are becoming. The dreams have prepared you for this next passage by strengthening your relationship with the inner wisdom that will guide you through the dark night of the soul that approaches, when even the gods themselves must fall to make way for a more authentic and direct encounter with the sacred mystery that lives at the heart of all existence. In the deepening mystery of transformation, as your dreams have begun to speak their ancient language and the shadow's gifts have been welcomed into the expanding circle of conscious awareness, a more profound dismantling begins to unfold. The very foundations upon which you have built your understanding of reality, those belief systems, ideologies, and worldviews that once provided unquestioned meaning and direction, begin to reveal their essential fragility. Like ancient statues weathered by time and elements, the mental constructs that shaped your reality start to show their cracks, their limitations, their ultimate inability to contain the vast mystery of existence that your awakening consciousness is beginning to perceive. This is perhaps the most disorienting phase of the individuation journey, for it strikes at the very core of what the rational mind considers most essential: its conceptual map of reality, its philosophical frameworks, its religious or spiritual beliefs, its political convictions, its moral certainties. These are not merely abstract ideas, but the very scaffolding upon which the ego has constructed its sense of meaning and purpose, its understanding of right and wrong, its vision of what life is for and how it should be lived. When these structures begin to crumble, the resulting experience can feel like spiritual vertigo, a dizzying loss of orientation that challenges everything you thought you knew about existence itself. The process often begins with small fissures in previously unshakable certainties. A religious doctrine that once provided comfort and guidance may suddenly seem hollow or irrelevant when held up against the lived reality of your expanding awareness. A political ideology that once offered clear answers to complex social questions may reveal its limitations when confronted with the nuanced complexity of actual human experience. A philosophical system that once seemed to explain everything may suddenly appear as just another partial perspective, one lens among many through which reality can be viewed, but none of them complete or final. These first cracks in the foundation of belief can be profoundly unsettling to the part of you that has relied upon ideological certainty for psychological security. The ego mind, trained to seek solid ground upon which to build its identity and worldview, experiences this crumbling as a fundamental threat to its survival. It may respond with increased defensiveness, clinging more tightly to familiar beliefs, becoming more rigid and dogmatic in its assertions, desperately trying to shore up the walls that are already beginning to tumble. But the deeper intelligence of the self recognizes this iconoclasm as necessary preparation for a more authentic encounter with the sacred mystery that underlies all conceptual frameworks. The old gods, those mental idols that the psyche created to organize and contain its understanding of the infinite, must die before the living God can be directly encountered. This is not a destruction of the sacred, but a clearing away of the limited containers that have constrained its expression, making space for a more immediate and unmediated relationship with the source of all meaning. The collapse often accelerates through encounters with perspectives that directly challenge your established worldview. A book falls into your hands that articulates with devastating clarity the limitations of beliefs you have held sacred. A conversation with a stranger reveals assumptions you didn't even know you carried. A life experience unfolds that simply cannot be explained within the parameters of your existing philosophical or spiritual framework. Each of these encounters acts like water seeping into the cracks of a stone, gradually expanding the fissures until the entire structure can no longer hold. You may find yourself in the strange position of simultaneously mourning and celebrating this collapse. There is genuine grief for the loss of certainty, for the comfort that came from knowing exactly where you stood in relationship to ultimate questions of meaning and purpose. The sense of belonging that came from sharing beliefs with others, the identity that was built around particular ideological commitments, the feeling of righteousness that accompanied moral certainty, all of this must be released as the old gods topple from their pedestals. Yet alongside this grief, there is also a strange relief, as if you are finally admitting something you have long sensed but been afraid to acknowledge, that the beliefs you held so tightly never really contained the fullness of your experience, that the maps you trusted never quite matched the territory you were actually traversing, that the answers you clung to were never adequate to the questions that lived most deeply in your heart. The process is particularly challenging because it often involves recognizing how your cherished beliefs served not just as maps of reality, but as defenses against the anxiety of uncertainty. The comfort of ideological belonging provided protection against the fundamental aloneness of human existence. The certainty of moral frameworks offered refuge from the complex responsibility of making ethical choices without predetermined guidelines. The security of religious or spiritual doctrines shielded you from direct encounter with the mystery that is ultimately beyond all human understanding. As these protective structures dissolve, you may find yourself face to face with existential questions that your belief systems previously answered automatically. What is the purpose of existence? How should one live? What happens after death? What is the nature of good and evil? Previously, these questions had settled answers provided by your adopted worldview. Now they emerge as living inquiries, open-ended explorations that invite your personal engagement rather than accepting predetermined conclusions. This transition from borrowed answers to personal inquiry marks a crucial shift in the individuation process, where once you looked to external authorities, religious teachers, philosophical systems, political ideologies for guidance about ultimate questions. Now you are being called to develop your own capacity for discernment, your own relationship with the mystery that underlies all existence. This is not a rejection of all wisdom traditions or collective insights, but rather a move toward a more mature relationship with them, one that honors their contributions while maintaining your own authentic engagement with fundamental questions. The collapse of old gods often reveals how much of what you took to be personal conviction was actually cultural conditioning, inherited beliefs that you absorbed without conscious choice. The religious or spiritual framework you identified with may be revealed as largely determined by the accident of your birth circumstances rather than by any deep personal revelation. The political views you held passionately may be shown to reflect more about your social environment and family history than about your own carefully considered values. This recognition can be initially devastating to the ego's sense of autonomy and authenticity, yet this recognition also opens the door to genuine choice about what you truly believe and value. Freed from the unconscious compulsion to defend inherited positions, you can begin to explore what perspectives and principles actually resonate with your deepest knowing. This is not a wholesale rejection of everything you previously believed, but rather a sifting process, a careful examination of what remains meaningful when stripped of social pressure and psychological need for belonging and certainty. The intermediate stage of this process can be particularly disorienting as you find yourself suspended between old certainties that no longer convince and new understandings that have not yet crystallized. This is the spiritual equivalent of the liminal space that anthropologists recognize in traditional rites of passage, the betwixt and between time when the initiate is no longer what they were but has not yet become what they are meant to be. It is a time of sacred confusion, of necessary not knowing that prepares the ground for authentic wisdom to emerge. During this liminal period, you may experience what mystics have called the dark night of the soul, a time when even the concept of God or ultimate meaning seems to have evacuated from your experience. Prayer may feel like speaking into an empty void. Meditation may bring no sense of connection or transcendence. The spiritual practices that once provided comfort and guidance may seem hollow and ineffective. This is not a sign that you have lost your way, but rather evidence that you are moving beyond second-hand relationship with the sacred toward the possibility of direct encounter. The collapse of ideological frameworks also affects your relationships with others, particularly those who were built around shared beliefs. Family members who bonded with you over religious convictions may feel threatened by your questioning. Friends who connected with you through political activism may become uncomfortable with your growing unwillingness to embrace simple answers to complex questions. Communities that welcomed you based on shared worldviews may feel less hospitable as you acknowledge uncertainty where once you expressed conviction. This social dimension of the collapse can be particularly painful, as it may involve the loss of important relationships or the transformation of connections that were central to your sense of belonging. Yet it also creates space for new relationships based on authenticity rather than ideology, connections that can embrace questions and uncertainty as readily as they welcome shared perspectives and beliefs. The process also reveals the difference between wisdom and mere knowledge, between living truth and conceptual understanding. The beliefs that collapse during this phase are often revealed to have been primarily intellectual constructs, ideas about reality rather than direct experience of it. What remains after the collapse are those insights that have been earned through lived experience, perspectives that have emerged from your personal encounter with life's challenges and mysteries, rather than being adopted from external sources. This discrimination between lived wisdom and borrowed knowledge becomes increasingly refined as the process continues. You develop what might be called spiritual discernment, the ability to distinguish between what rings true in your direct experience and what merely sounds impressive or comforting to the conceptual mind. This discernment operates not through rational analysis alone, but through a deeper sensing and attunement to what resonates with the authentic self beneath all the layers of conditioning and social adaptation. As the old gods continue their inevitable descent into the underworld of discarded beliefs, space begins to open for a more direct relationship with whatever lies beyond all human concepts and frameworks. This is not necessarily a relationship with what traditional religions call God, though it may include that possibility. Rather, it is an opening to the mystery itself, to the source from which all meanings and purposes arise, to the ground of being that exists prior to and beyond all human attempts to capture it in language and concept. This opening often brings with it a profound sense of humility as you recognize how small and partial all human understanding is in the face of the vast mystery of existence. The arrogance that can accompany ideological certainty gives way to what Socrates called the wisdom of knowing that you know nothing. This is not the ignorance of someone who has never learned, but the sophisticated not knowing of someone who has discovered the limitations of all learning when confronted with the infinite. Yet this humility is not diminishing, but expanding, not a reduction of your significance, but a recognition of your participation in something so much larger than what the conceptual mind can grasp. The ego's need to understand and control begins to give way to a deeper capacity for wonder, for reverence, for what religious traditions have called faith, not belief in particular doctrines, but trust in the fundamental meaningfulness of existence, even when that meaning cannot be fully comprehended. The collapse of old gods also reveals the difference between religion and religiosity, between spiritual practice and spiritual experience. The external forms of religious and spiritual life, the rituals, the texts, the teachings, the communities, may lose their grip on your allegiance, even as you discover a deeper appreciation for the experiences they were designed to facilitate. You may find yourself less interested in doctrines about the nature of divinity and more open to direct encounter with whatever is divine in your immediate experience. This shift from external authority to inner authority represents one of the most significant movements in the individuation journey, where once you looked to books, teachers, traditions, and institutions to tell you what to believe and how to live. Now you are being called to develop your own capacity for spiritual discernment, your own relationship with the sacred mystery that cannot be contained by any human framework, but can be directly encountered in the depths of authentic experience. The process is gradual and often cyclical, with periods of clarity alternating with renewed confusion, moments of profound insight followed by returns to uncertainty and questioning. This is not a linear progression, but a spiral deepening, each revolution bringing you into more authentic relationship with both the questions that matter most and your own capacity for living with uncertainty while remaining open to wisdom from whatever source it may arise. As this phase of the transformation approaches its completion, what emerges is not a new set of beliefs to replace the old ones, but rather a fundamentally different way of relating to belief itself. You may find yourself able to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously without needing to choose definitively between them. you may discover that what matters most is not having the right answers, but asking the right questions, not achieving certainty, but developing the capacity to live creatively and meaningfully in the face of mystery. The old gods, having completed their necessary death, may even begin to resurrect in new forms, not as objects of blind faith or ideological commitment, but as symbols and metaphors that point toward truths that cannot be captured in literal language. The religious traditions you once abandoned may reveal new layers of meaning when approached not as sources of absolute truth, but as repositories of human wisdom about the perennial challenges of existence. The philosophical frameworks you discarded may prove useful as tools for thinking rather than as final answers to ultimate questions. This resurrection is qualitatively different from the original belief, informed now by the wisdom gained through the journey of collapse and reconstruction. It is belief that knows itself to be belief, rather than claiming to be absolute truth. Conviction that remains open to revision and refinement. Commitment that can embrace uncertainty as a creative rather than threatening force. The stage is now set for what Jung called the emergence of the transcendent function, that capacity of the psyche to hold opposites in creative tension without being torn apart by their contradictions. The ego, having survived the collapse of its ideological supports, discovers that it is more flexible and resilient than it ever imagined. The self, having been freed from the constraints of borrowed meanings and second-hand spirituality, begins to express itself with unprecedented authenticity and power. The journey continues, but now from a foundation that is no longer built upon the shifting sands of belief systems and worldviews, but upon the solid rock of direct experience and personal relationship with the mystery that underlies all existence. The old gods have fallen, but in their place arises something far more reliable and infinitely more alive, the capacity for ongoing revelation, for continuous discovery, for authentic encounter with the sacred dimension of existence that was always present, but previously obscured by the very concepts that claimed to reveal it. There comes a moment in the great unfolding of consciousness when the world begins to speak in tongues you have never learned, yet somehow understand with a knowing that predates language itself. The rational mind, that faithful sentinel of order and causality, finds itself standing at the threshold of a mystery so profound that all its carefully constructed maps of reality begin to shimmer and dissolve like morning mist before the rising sun. You are walking through your ordinary days when suddenly the extraordinary breaks through the membrane of the mundane. A song on the radio speaks directly to the question burning in your heart. A stranger on the street wears the exact words you need to hear emblazoned across their shirt. A book falls open to precisely the page that holds the key to your current dilemma. These are not mere coincidences, those comfortable explanations the ego offers to maintain its illusion of a mechanistic universe. These are synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that Jung called a causal connecting principle, threads in the great tapestry of existence that reveal themselves only to those whose inner eye has begun to open. The very fabric of reality begins to reveal its hidden patterns, as if you have been given spectacles that allow you to perceive the luminous web of connection that has always existed but remained invisible to your unseeing eyes. What once appeared as a collection of random events now reveals itself as a symphony of meaning, each note precisely placed in the grand composition of your becoming. The universe you begin to understand is not the cold, indifferent machine that modernity would have you believe, but a living, breathing organism of consciousness that responds to the depths of your psyche with the tender attention of a lover who knows your every thought before you think it. This is the activation of what Jung called the transcendent function, that bridge between the conscious and unconscious realms that allows the psyche to communicate with itself through the language of the outer world. Your inner transformation creates ripples in the quantum field of possibility, drawing to you exactly what you need for your continued evolution. It is as if your soul has learned to speak the ancient dialect of creation itself, whispering its needs into the cosmic ear and receiving answers in the form of seemingly random encounters, chance meetings, and perfectly timed revelations. The ego, accustomed to its role as the architect of its own destiny, struggles to comprehend this new order of being. It searches frantically for logical explanations, for the hidden mechanisms that must surely govern these mysterious correspondences. But synchronicity exists beyond the realm of cause and effect. In that liminal space where meaning supersedes mechanism, where significance trumps sequence, it operates according to the laws of the psyche rather than the laws of physics, responding not to force but to resonance, not to effort but to alignment. You begin to notice that these meaningful coincidences cluster around the edges of your deepest transformations, appearing most frequently when you are poised on the threshold of breakthrough or breakdown, those moments when the chrysalis of your old identity grows too tight and threatens to split open to reveal the butterfly of your authentic self. It is as if the universe conspires to support your individuation, offering confirmation and guidance precisely when your faith in the process wavers most profoundly. The synchronicities arrive like breadcrumbs on the forest path of your becoming, leading you deeper into the wilderness of your own soul. A recurring number sequence follows you through your days, on clocks, receipts, license plates, until you can no longer ignore its insistent presence. You discover that this number holds personal significance, connecting to a birth date and anniversary, a moment of profound revelation that shaped the trajectory of your becoming. The universe is speaking to you in the language of your own mythology, using the symbols and patterns that resonate most deeply with your individual psyche. Sometimes the synchronicities arrive as what Jung called meaningful disruptions, events that seem initially chaotic or distressing, but reveal their purpose only in retrospect. The missed appointment that leads to an unexpected encounter, the canceled flight that places you in the right city at the perfect moment, the broken relationship that creates the space for a more authentic love to emerge. These apparent setbacks are revealed as sacred detours, the wisdom of the self redirecting your path toward a destination your ego could never have imagined. The development of sensitivity to synchronicity is itself a mark of psychological maturation, a sign that you have developed what Jung called the synthetic method of understanding, the ability to perceive meaning and purpose, rather than merely analyzing causes and effects. Your psyche begins to function less like a computer processing data and more like a divining rod detecting hidden currents of significance that flow beneath the surface of apparent reality. This heightened awareness brings with it both wonder and responsibility. You realize that you are not merely a passive recipient of these meaningful coincidences, but an active participant in their creation. Your inner state, your emotional resonance, your level of consciousness all contribute to the quality and frequency of synchronistic events in your life. The more aligned you become with your authentic self, the more the external world seems to mirror and support your inner truth. The persona, that carefully crafted mask you once wore to navigate social expectations, becomes less adept at attracting synchronicities. These meaningful coincidences seem to respond only to your most authentic vibration, bypassing the artificial frequencies of your adapted personality to resonate with the core note of your essential being. It is as if the universe has a built-in authenticity detector, responding only to the genuine article and remaining deaf to the imitations and approximations of your false selves. You begin to understand that synchronicity is the language through which your unconscious communicates not only with your conscious mind, but with the larger unconscious of the collective, that vast reservoir of shared human experience and wisdom. Your personal transformation becomes part of a larger pattern of awakening that ripples through the morphic field of human consciousness, contributing to the evolutionary impulse that drives all of life toward greater complexity, awareness, and integration. The shadow, that rejected aspect of your personality that you have worked so diligently to integrate, often announces its presence through synchronistic events. The very person or situation you most wish to avoid appears repeatedly in your path, offering you another opportunity to face and embrace what you have pushed away. The universe becomes a mirror for your inner work, reflecting back to you the parts of yourself that still require attention and integration. Dreams begin to bleed into waking reality through synchronistic manifestations. The symbol that haunted your night visions appears carved into a building you pass on the street. The person who delivered an important message in your dream calls you unexpectedly the following day. The boundary between sleeping and waking consciousness becomes more permeable, as if your psyche is learning to function as a unified whole rather than a collection of fragmented states. Your relationship with time itself begins to shift as you become more attuned to synchronicity. Linear time, that rigid taskmaster of modern life, reveals itself as merely one dimension of temporal experience. You begin to perceive what Jung called synchronistic time, moments of vertical breakthrough, when eternity penetrates the horizontal flow of sequential events. In these moments, past, present, and future converge in a singular point of meaning that transcends the limitations of chronological sequence. The ancient practice of divination, whether through tarot, I Ching, or other oracular systems, begins to make sense as you recognize synchronicity as the mechanism through which these systems function. They are not fortune-telling devices, but synchronicity amplifiers, ways of creating a sacred space where meaningful coincidence can more easily manifest. The random fall of coins or cards becomes a mirror for the random movements of your unconscious, allowing hidden patterns and potentials to surface into awareness. You start to notice that certain locations seem to be particularly fertile ground for synchronistic experiences, sacred sites, places of natural beauty, spaces where many people have experienced profound transformation. These locations seem to hold an energetic charge that makes the veil between inner and outer worlds more transparent. You find yourself drawn to these places during times of significant transition, as if your soul knows where to go to receive the guidance and confirmation it seeks. The cultivation of what Jung called active imagination enhances your capacity for synchronistic experience. As you learn to dialogue with the figures and images that emerge from your unconscious, you create pathways of communication between your inner and outer worlds. The characters from your imagination begin to appear in various forms in your external reality, as if the boundaries between subjective and objective experience have become more fluid and permeable. Your dreams become increasingly prophetic, not in the sense of predicting specific future events, but in revealing the archetypal patterns that are seeking to manifest in your life. You dream of a wise old woman and then encounter such a figure who offers you crucial guidance. You dream of crossing a bridge and then find yourself facing a real-life transition that requires you to leave one phase of your existence behind and step into something entirely new. The phenomenon Jung called cryptomnesia, the emergence of apparently forgotten memories, begins to play a role in your synchronistic experiences. Knowledge and insights that you cannot remember acquiring surface just when you need them most, as if your unconscious has been collecting and storing exactly what your conscious mind would require for this moment of your journey. The book you once read and forgot suddenly yields its wisdom. The conversation you have heard years ago provides the key to your current puzzle. Synchronicity reveals itself as one of the primary ways the self, that central organizing principle of your psyche, communicates with your ego consciousness. It is the self's way of confirming that you are on the right path, of offering course corrections when you veer too far from your authentic trajectory, of providing encouragement when the journey becomes too difficult for your limited perspective to bear. Each meaningful coincidence is a love letter from your deeper self, a reminder that you are held and guided by a wisdom far greater than your conscious understanding. The collective unconscious begins to manifest more directly in your personal experience through synchronistic events. Archetypal figures and mythological themes start appearing in your daily life with increasing frequency, as if the eternal stories that have shaped human consciousness throughout history are seeking to live themselves through your individual existence. You become a walking myth, a living embodiment of the timeless patterns that connect you to the great chain of being that stretches from the first stirrings of consciousness to the ultimate destiny of human evolution. As your sensitivity to synchronicity deepens, you begin to recognize that these meaningful coincidences have always been present in your life, but your previous level of consciousness was too narrow to perceive them. Looking back with your newly opened eyes, you can see the golden thread of synchronicity weaving through even your darkest periods, evidence that you have always been held and guided, even when you felt most alone and abandoned. The practice of gratitude becomes a powerful amplifier of synchronistic experience. As you acknowledge and appreciate the meaningful coincidences in your life, you seem to create a feedback loop that generates even more such experiences. It is as if your recognition and appreciation of the universe's communication creates an opening for even deeper levels of dialogue and connection. You begin to understand that synchronicity is not just a psychological phenomenon, but a spiritual technology, a means by which consciousness recognizes and communicates with itself across apparent barriers of space, time, and separate identity. Each synchronistic event is a moment of communion with the divine intelligence that pervades all of existence, a direct experience of the underlying unity that connects all seemingly separate phenomena. The cultivation of what mystics have called beginner's mind, a state of openness, wonder, and fresh perception, becomes essential for maintaining your sensitivity to synchronicity. The more you think you understand how the universe works, the less available you become to its mysterious communications. It is the quality of innocent expectation, of childlike wonder at the magic of existence, that keeps the channels of synchronicity clear and flowing. Your relationship with uncertainty begins to transform as you develop trust in the synchronistic process. Where once uncertainty felt like a threat to your security and control, you now recognize it as the fertile ground from which meaningful coincidences emerge. You learn to hold your questions lightly, to live with unresolved tensions, knowing that the answer will arrive in its own perfect timing through the most unexpected channels. The phenomenon of synchronistic cascades begins to occur, periods when meaningful coincidences come in rapid succession, creating a sense of being swept along by a powerful current of purposeful unfolding. During these times, it becomes clear that you are being actively guided through some significant transition or initiation, that the universe has mobilized its resources to support your evolution through a particularly crucial phase of your development. You start to notice that your capacity for synchronistic experience is directly related to your level of inner alignment and authenticity. The more you live from your true center, the more the external world seems to conspire to support and confirm your choices. The more you betray your authentic nature in favor of social expectations or ego gratification, the more the flow of meaningful coincidences seems to dry up, leaving you feeling isolated and disconnected from the larger pattern of existence. The integration of synchronistic awareness into your daily life requires a delicate balance between attention and attachment. You must remain alert to the meaningful patterns emerging around you while avoiding the trap of forcing or manipulating synchronistic events. The moment you try to control the process, you step out of the flow of natural unfolding and back into the realm of ego-driven causality. As your journey deepens, you begin to recognize that your entire life has been a synchronistic event, a meaningful coincidence of cosmic proportions. Your birth at this particular time in history, in this specific family, with these unique gifts and challenges, begins to reveal itself as part of a larger pattern of purpose that extends far beyond your individual existence. You start to sense your role in the great awakening of human consciousness, understanding that your personal transformation is both a gift to yourself and a service to the collective evolution of the species. The sacred web of synchronicity continues to reveal itself with ever-increasing subtlety and beauty, teaching you to read the secret writing that has always been inscribed in the fabric of existence. You become fluent in the language of meaningful coincidence, able to perceive the poetry of purpose that flows through even the most mundane moments of your daily experience. In this awakening to the synchronistic dimension of reality, you discover that you have never been separate from the creative intelligence of the universe. You have always been one of the instruments through which it plays its eternal song of becoming. Like a flower that has lived its entire existence in the shadows, suddenly thrust into the full radiance of dawn, your psyche begins to unfurl sensitivities you never knew you possessed. The protective shell that once shielded you from the overwhelming intensity of existence starts to thin and crack, not through damage, but through maturation, the natural consequence of a consciousness that has outgrown its former limitations and stands ready to perceive reality with unprecedented clarity and depth. This is not the brittle sensitivity of wounded ego or the reactive hypersensitivity of unhealed trauma, though these may have been the crude ore from which your refined awareness was eventually smelted. This is something far more profound, the development of what mystics have called the subtle senses, those delicate organs of perception that allow you to feel the invisible currents flowing between souls, to sense the emotional weather patterns that sweep through collective consciousness, to perceive the barely audible whispers of intuitive wisdom that arise from the deepest wells of knowing. Your nervous system, that intricate network of electrochemical communication that connects every cell of your being, begins to function less like a simple alarm system and more like a sophisticated radar array, capable of detecting frequencies and vibrations that previously remained below the threshold of your awareness. You find yourself picking up on the unspoken tensions in a room before anyone voices their concerns. You sense the emotional undercurrents that flow beneath polite conversation, feeling the authentic feelings that hide behind social masks and conventional pleasantries. This heightened sensitivity manifests first as an almost overwhelming awareness of the pain and beauty that surrounds you at every moment. The suffering of strangers on the street moves through you like physical ache. The joy of children at play awakens in you such profound tenderness that tears spring to your eyes without warning. The natural world reveals itself as a vast symphony of feeling. You sense the contentment of cats basking in sunlight, the patient endurance of ancient trees, the restless longing of clouds drifting across the sky seeking their destined destination, the persona that carefully constructed social identity you once wore like armor against the world's intensity, begins to feel increasingly inadequate to contain the flood of sensation and emotion that now moves through you. The polite responses and socially appropriate reactions feel thin and false against the richness of what you actually perceive and feel. You find yourself struggling to participate in conversations about trivial matters when you can feel the deeper currents of meaning and purpose that flow beneath the surface of everyday discourse. Your empathic abilities, once limited to the obvious emotional expressions of those closest to you, expand to encompass strangers, animals, and even the subtle emanations of places and objects. You walk into a house and immediately sense the quality of relationships that have unfolded within its walls. You hold an antique object and feel echoes of the emotions and intentions of those who once possessed it. You enter a forest and perceive the complex web of communication that flows between trees, plants, and soil in an endless exchange of chemical and energetic information. This expansion of sensitivity extends beyond the emotional and empathic realms into the domain of pure energy and vibration. You begin to feel the electromagnetic fields that surround electronic devices, sensing the invisible radiation that permeates modern environments. Certain locations feel charged with particular qualities of energy. Some places energize and uplift you, while others drain your vitality or create feelings of unease that have nothing to do with your personal associations or memories. The boundary between your inner emotional landscape and the external world becomes increasingly permeable. You discover that your mood and energy state can be profoundly influenced by factors you previously never considered: the phase of the moon, the weather patterns moving through your region, the collective emotional climate generated by world events and social tensions. You are no longer a separate individual immune to environmental influences, but a sensitive instrument registering the subtle fluctuations in the field of consciousness that connects all living beings. Your relationship with time shifts dramatically as your sensitivity to energy and emotion deepens. You begin to feel the approach of significant events before they manifest in physical reality. Periods of intense change cast their shadows before them, creating feelings of restlessness, anticipation, or inexplicable melancholy. Days or even weeks before the actual transformation begins. You start to perceive time not as a uniform flow, but as a medium with varying densities and qualities. Some moments feel thick with potential, while others seem almost empty of significance. Sleep becomes a more complex and meaningful experience as your psychic sensitivity increases. Your dreams grow more vivid and prophetic, often containing information about situations and people you will encounter in your waking life. You begin to wake with intuitive insights about friends and family members, later discovering that your nighttime awareness somehow tuned into their actual experiences and needs. The boundary between sleeping and waking consciousness becomes more fluid, as if your psyche is learning to maintain its sensitivity across all states of being. The shadow aspect of yourself, those parts of your personality you have rejected or denied, begins to announce its presence through your heightened sensitivity. You find yourself triggered by behaviors and attitudes in others that mirror your own unconscious patterns. The very qualities you judge most harshly in the world around you reveal themselves as aspects of your own nature that you have refused to acknowledge and integrate. Your sensitivity becomes a mirror reflecting back to you the parts of yourself that still require attention and acceptance. Your capacity to sense the authentic nature of people becomes almost uncomfortably acute. The masks and personas others wear in social situations become transparent to your heightened perception. You can feel the difference between genuine kindness and manipulative charm, between authentic confidence and compensatory bravado, between real love and emotional neediness masquerading as affection. This gift of discernment, while invaluable for your own protection and growth, can create feelings of isolation as you struggle to find others who are willing to meet you at the level of authenticity your sensitivity demands. The collective unconscious begins to impinge more directly on your personal consciousness through your expanded sensitivity. You find yourself feeling the archetypal energies that move through human civilization, sensing the restless stirring of the warrior archetype during times of conflict, feeling the activation of the mother archetype during periods of crisis and healing, perceiving the emergence of the wise elder archetype when humanity faces crossroads requiring ancient wisdom and deep perspective. Your sensitivity to the natural world deepens to the point where you begin to feel yourself as part of the larger organism of Earth's consciousness. You sense the seasons changing not just through external observation, but through subtle shifts in your own cellular awareness. You feel the moon's phases as rhythmic pulses in your emotional and intuitive life. You begin to understand that your individual sensitivity is actually a manifestation of the planet's own awakening consciousness, as if Gaia herself is developing more refined organs of perception through sensitive individuals like yourself. The phenomenon Jung called participation mystique, the unconscious identification with others, becomes more pronounced as your psychic boundaries become more permeable. You sometimes find yourself feeling emotions or experiencing physical sensations that belong to people around you, requiring you to develop greater skill in distinguishing between your own authentic feelings and those you have unconsciously absorbed from your environment. This challenge demands the development of stronger psychic boundaries and more conscious awareness of your own energetic field. Your creative and artistic sensitivities expand exponentially as your overall psychic sensitivity deepens. Colors become more vivid and emotionally evocative. Music moves through you like a physical force, sometimes bringing you to tears with its beauty or stirring you to ecstatic states of consciousness. Poetry and literature reveal layers of meaning that were previously invisible to your understanding. You begin to perceive the archetypal patterns and mythic structures that underlie all genuine artistic expression. The development of what mystics call subtle body awareness becomes increasingly prominent in your experience. You begin to sense the energy centers or chakras along your spine, feeling their opening, closing, and varying degrees of vitality throughout the day. You perceive your aura or energy field as a tangible presence surrounding your physical body, sometimes extending several feet in all directions, other times contracting close to your skin, depending on your emotional state and level of vitality. Your sensitivity to the intentions and motivations of others becomes so refined that you can often sense what someone is going to say before they speak, or feel the emotional undercurrents that will eventually surface in their behavior. This precognitive empathy allows you to navigate relationships with greater wisdom and compassion, but it can also create challenges when others are not ready to acknowledge or work with the deeper truths that your sensitivity reveals. The process of individuation accelerates as your heightened sensitivity provides you with more refined feedback about your own psychological processes. You can feel when you are moving toward greater authenticity and integration, experiencing these periods as times of increased vitality, clarity, and inner harmony. Conversely, you can immediately sense when you are betraying your authentic nature or avoiding necessary growth, experiencing these deviations as energetic discord, emotional turbulence, or physical tension. Your relationship with solitude transforms as your sensitivity deepens. Alone time becomes essential not just for rest and reflection, but for processing the enormous amount of subtle information you now absorb from your environment. You need periods of energetic clearing and psychic detoxification times when you can discharge the accumulated emotional and energetic residue you have picked up from others and reconnect with your own authentic vibrational signature. The sensitivity extends into the realm of what Jung called the objective psyche, those autonomous complexes and archetypal forces that operate within the collective unconscious. You begin to feel the presence of these psychological entities as distinct energetic signatures, sometimes experiencing them as inner voices, images, or felt senses that carry their own intelligence and purposes. Your heightened sensitivity allows you to develop conscious relationships with these inner figures, learning to dialogue with them and integrate their wisdom into your conscious understanding. Your perception of illness and healing undergoes a profound transformation as your sensitivity to energy and emotion increases. You begin to sense disease as distortions in the natural flow of life force through the body, feeling these blockages and imbalances long before they manifest as physical symptoms. You can perceive the emotional and psychological roots of physical ailments, understanding how unprocessed feelings and unconscious conflicts create patterns of energetic disruption that eventually crystallize into bodily dysfunction. The phenomenon of psychic contagion becomes more apparent as your sensitivity increases. You realize that emotions, thoughts, and even physical symptoms can be transmitted between people through unconscious energetic exchange. You learn to recognize when you are carrying someone else's depression, anxiety, or excitement, developing skills to consciously release these borrowed emotional states and maintain your own psychological equilibrium. Your sensitivity to the sacred dimensions of existence becomes increasingly refined. You can feel the presence of what Rudolf Otto called the numinous, that quality of divine mystery that imbues certain places, moments, and experiences with transcendent significance. Sacred sites, ancient monuments, and places of natural beauty reveal themselves as locations where the veil between visible and invisible worlds has grown thin, allowing higher frequencies of consciousness to penetrate more easily into ordinary awareness. The development of this great sensitivity brings with it the responsibility of learning to modulate and protect your newly opened awareness. Like a person who has lived in darkness and must gradually adjust to bright light, you must learn to regulate your psychic sensitivity to avoid being overwhelmed by the intensity of expanded perception. This requires the cultivation of what esoteric traditions call psychic hygiene, practices for clearing, protecting, and strengthening your energetic field. Your sleep patterns and dream life transform as your overall sensitivity increases. You may find yourself waking frequently during the night, not from disturbance but from the intensity of your dream experiences or from psychic impressions that require conscious processing. Your dreams become more lucid and interactive, sometimes feeling more real and significant than your waking experiences. You begin to receive guidance, healing, and prophetic information through your dream states with increasing frequency and clarity. The sensitivity extends into your relationship with technology and modern environments. You become more aware of the electromagnetic pollution that surrounds contemporary life, feeling the subtle but persistent stress that electronic devices place on your nervous system. You find yourself drawn to natural environments and organic materials as antidotes to the harsh frequencies of modern civilization, seeking out forests, gardens, and wild spaces as sanctuaries where your nervous system can recalibrate and your sensitivity can function without interference. Your awareness of seasonal and celestial cycles becomes more pronounced as your psychic sensitivity increases. You feel the turning of the seasons not just as external changes, but as rhythmic shifts in consciousness itself. The waxing and waning of the moon creates palpable changes in your emotional and intuitive awareness, Solar flares and other cosmic events register in your consciousness as subtle but noticeable alterations in your mental and emotional state. The great sensitivity ultimately reveals itself as a crucial development in the process of individuation, a sign that your consciousness is expanding beyond the narrow confines of ego identification toward the broader awareness of the self. This sensitivity is not a burden to be managed or a weakness to be overcome, but a gift to be honored and developed. It represents the flowering of your soul's capacity to perceive and participate in the vast web of consciousness that connects all existence. As your sensitivity continues to deepen and mature, you begin to understand that this expansion of awareness is not ultimately about you as an individual, but about consciousness itself awakening to its own nature through your particular nervous system. You become an instrument through which the universe can feel and know itself more intimately, a conscious participant in the ongoing evolution of awareness that drives all of existence toward ever greater complexity, beauty, and understanding. This great sensitivity, properly understood and skillfully developed, becomes one of your most valuable allies in the journey toward wholeness and authentic self-expression. It provides you with the subtle perceptual abilities necessary to navigate the invisible dimensions of existence, to commune with the deeper intelligences that guide human evolution, and to serve as a bridge between the worlds of matter and spirit, form and consciousness, individual and collective awakening. There comes a time in the deep journey of becoming when the soul issues an unmistakable summons, not toward the bright lights and clamorous voices of the external world, but inward into the vast and largely unexplored territories of your own being. This is the Hermit's calling, that ancient and sacred withdrawal from the collective noise of human discourse into the pregnant silence where the most profound dialogues of existence can finally unfold without interference or distraction. It begins as a subtle restlessness, a growing sense that the conversations, activities, and social rituals that once nourished and sustained you now feel hollow and depleting. The endless chatter of modern life, the constant stream of opinions, judgments, and superficial exchanges that fill the airwaves and digital spaces of contemporary existence begins to feel like static interference, preventing you from hearing the deeper frequencies of truth that are trying to emerge from within your own depths. You find yourself increasingly drawn to solitude, not from misanthropy or social dysfunction, but from a profound recognition that something essential is seeking to be born within you that requires the kind of attention and space that can only be found in the sanctuary of your own company. The Hermit's path is not an escape from life, but a deeper engagement with life at its source, where the constant external stimulation that normally drowns out the subtle voice of inner wisdom finally falls away, allowing you to hear what your soul has been trying to tell you all along. This withdrawal is often misunderstood by those who have not felt its call. Friends and family members may interpret your need for solitude as depression, antisocial behavior, or a rejection of their love and companionship. They cannot understand that this turning inward is not a turning away from them, but a turning toward something so fundamental and necessary that without it, your continued participation in relationship and community would become increasingly hollow and inauthentic. The Hermit's calling is one of the most ancient patterns in human spiritual development, appearing in every wisdom tradition as a necessary phase of deep transformation. The Buddha's years of solitary meditation, Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness, the desert fathers and mothers who withdrew from the world to commune with the divine, all point to this universal recognition that certain kinds of growth and awakening can only occur in the fertile emptiness of voluntary isolation. your newfound sensitivity to the energetic and emotional currents that flow between people makes social interaction increasingly complex and sometimes overwhelming. You feel the unspoken tensions, the hidden agendas, the emotional projections, and unconscious shadow material that people carry into every encounter. What once seemed like simple social gathering now reveals itself as an intricate dance of psychological forces, most of which operate below the threshold of conscious awareness for the participants involved. The persona, that carefully crafted social identity you developed to navigate the expectations and demands of collective life, begins to feel increasingly burdensome and artificial. The energy required to maintain your socially acceptable mask becomes more costly than the rewards it provides. You long for authentic encounter, for relationships based on truth rather than convenience, for conversations that touch the depths of real human experience rather than skimming along the surface of conventional pleasantries. In the beginning, this withdrawal may feel like exile, a banishment from the warm community of human fellowship into the cold wasteland of isolation. But as you settle more deeply into solitude, you begin to discover that this apparent emptiness is actually teeming with life and possibility. The silence that initially felt barren and lonely gradually reveals itself as pregnant with potential, thick with the presence of aspects of yourself you never knew existed. The hermit's cave, whether it is a literal physical space or the metaphorical retreat into your own inner landscape, becomes a laboratory for the most important experiments in consciousness that you will ever conduct. Here, freed from the constant need to respond to external demands and expectations, you can finally turn your attention to the vast unexplored continent of your own psyche, mapping its territories, cataloging its inhabitants, learning its languages and customs. You discover that solitude is not emptiness but fullness, not the absence of company, but the presence of your deepest self. In the quiet spaces between thoughts, in the gaps between heartbeats, in the profound stillness that emerges when all external stimulation finally ceases, you begin to sense the immense aliveness that has always been present but was previously obscured by the noise and movement of constant activity. The dialogue between ego and self, that central conversation of individuation that Jung identified as the core work of psychological and spiritual development, can finally begin in earnest, when the competing voices of external influence are temporarily silenced. Your ego, accustomed to defining itself in relationship to others and in response to external circumstances, must learn to find its ground in relation to the deeper organizing principles of your own nature. This period of withdrawal often coincides with what mystics have called the dark night of the soul, a time when the old certainties and identities that once provided meaning and direction begin to dissolve, but the new understanding and identity have not yet crystallized. You may feel suspended between worlds, no longer able to find satisfaction in the pursuits and pleasures that once sustained you, but not yet clear about what new direction your life should take. The shadow aspects of your personality, those rejected and denied parts of yourself that you have spent a lifetime avoiding, have nowhere to hide in the honest mirror of solitude. Without the convenient projections and distractions that social interaction provides, you must finally face the full spectrum of your own nature, including those qualities and impulses that you have judged as unacceptable or unworthy of acknowledgement. Dreams become more vivid and significant during periods of hermit-like withdrawal. Your unconscious, no longer competing with constant external input for your attention, can communicate more directly and clearly through the symbolic language of sleep visions. You may find yourself receiving profound guidance, healing imagery, and prophetic insights through your dream life with unprecedented clarity and frequency. The hermit's calling is not necessarily a permanent lifestyle, but often a cyclical need that emerges during times of significant transition and transformation. Like the snake that must periodically shed its skin to continue growing, your psyche may require regular periods of withdrawal and renewal to integrate new levels of awareness and discard outgrown patterns of being. Your relationship with time undergoes a fundamental shift during these periods of voluntary isolation. Clock time, that relentless taskmaster of modern productivity, loses much of its urgency and relevance. You begin to operate according to what might be called soul time, the natural rhythms of inner growth and development that unfold according to their own organic patterns rather than external schedules and deadlines. The collective unconscious becomes more accessible when you withdraw from the constant influence of collective consciousness. The archetypal energies and universal patterns that shape human experience can emerge more clearly into awareness when they are not filtered through the particular biases and limitations of your social group or cultural moment. You may find yourself accessing wisdom traditions, mythological insights, and spiritual understandings that seem to arise from sources beyond your personal education or experience. Creativity often flourishes during periods of hermit-like withdrawal. Artists, writers, musicians, and inventors throughout history have recognized the necessity of solitude for allowing the deeper creative forces to emerge. The constant input and stimulation of social interaction can overwhelm the subtle creative impulses that require quiet space and patient attention to develop into full expression. Your sensitivity to the natural world often increases dramatically during periods of solitude. Without the mediating influence of human culture and civilization, you may find yourself developing more direct and intimate relationships with plants, animals, weather patterns, and seasonal cycles. The earth itself becomes a companion and teacher, offering its own forms of wisdom and guidance. The hermit phase of development is often accompanied by what could be called the great listening, a profound receptivity to the subtle communications that are always available, but usually drowned out by the noise of ordinary life. You learn to hear the voice of your own deeper wisdom, the guidance of your inner teacher, the whispered instructions of your soul's authentic purpose. Physical spaces take on new significance during this period of withdrawal. Your home, bedroom, or special retreat space becomes a sanctuary, a sacred container for the deep inner work that is unfolding. You may find yourself drawn to create altars, meditation corners, or other physical arrangements that support and reflect your inward journey. The relationship with the body often transforms during periods of hermit-like solitude. Without the constant pressure to present yourself according to social expectations, you may discover more authentic ways of inhabiting your physical form, your body's natural rhythms of thems. Hunger, sleep, and activity can reassert themselves without the interference of social schedules and obligations. Reading takes on a different quality during periods of withdrawal. Books become intimate companions, their authors trusted guides in the landscape of consciousness you are exploring. You may find yourself drawn to wisdom literature, spiritual texts, depth psychology, and other materials that support your inner journey, rather than merely entertaining or informing your surface mind. The hermit's calling often brings with it a temporary but necessary disillusionment with the values and priorities of mainstream culture. What once seemed important and meaningful, career advancement, social status, material acquisition, entertainment, may suddenly appear hollow and meaningless against the backdrop of the deeper questions that are emerging from your contemplative practice. Your dreams of the future begin to shift during this period of withdrawal. Instead of imagining yourself achieving greater success within existing social and cultural frameworks, you may begin to envision entirely different ways of being and living that are more aligned with the authentic nature you are discovering in solitude. The hermit phase is often a time of intense reading and study, but of a very different kind than academic or professional learning. You find yourself drawn to texts and teachings that speak to the deeper questions of existence. Who am I really? What is the meaning of my life? How can I live in greater alignment with truth? This is soul education, the kind of learning that transforms your entire being rather than simply adding new information to your mental storehouse. Prayer, meditation, contemplation, and other practices of inner communion often begin or deepen during the hermit phase. These are not necessarily religious practices in the conventional sense, but rather technologies of consciousness that allow you to develop more intimate relationships with the deeper dimensions of your own being and the larger intelligence that pervades existence. The ego's relationship to control and certainty is profoundly challenged during periods of hermit-like withdrawal. Without the familiar reference points of social interaction and external achievement, you must learn to find your ground in uncertainty, to be comfortable with not knowing, to trust in processes of growth and development that operate according to their own mysterious logic. Your relationship with your own mortality often deepens during the hermit phase. Confronted with the finite nature of your existence, without the usual distractions and denials that social life provides, you may find yourself grappling more directly with questions of legacy, meaning, and what it means to live a life worth living. The hermit's calling is ultimately an initiation into a deeper level of self-reliance, not the superficial independence of the ego that simply wants to be free from external interference, but the profound self-sufficiency of a soul that has learned to find its nourishment and guidance from the inexhaustible wellspring of its own authentic nature. As the hermit phase deepens and matures, you begin to understand that this withdrawal from the world is actually preparation for a more authentic and meaningful engagement with the world. The insights, clarity, and inner strength you develop in solitude will eventually enable you to participate in relationship and community from a place of genuine overflow rather than unconscious need or social conditioning. The hermit's lantern, that symbol of inner illumination that the hermit carries to light the way for others, begins to kindle during this period of withdrawal. The wisdom and understanding you develop in solitude becomes a gift that you will eventually be called to share with others who are ready to undertake their own journey into the depths of authentic being. Your relationship with guidance and authority undergoes a fundamental transformation during the hermit phase. Instead of looking to external experts, teachers, or institutions for direction, you begin to develop trust in your own inner compass, your own capacity for discernment, your own ability to distinguish between the voice of authentic wisdom and the chatter of fear, conditioning, and ego-driven desire. The hermit's calling ultimately reveals itself as one of the most generous and selfless acts you can perform, not because you are withdrawing from service to others, but because you are preparing yourself to serve from a place of authentic depth and wisdom rather than surface good intentions and unconscious projection. This sacred withdrawal, properly understood and skillfully navigated, becomes a crucible of transformation in which the raw ore of your personality is refined into the gold of genuine character. In the solitude of your own company, you discover not loneliness, but the companionship of your own soul, not emptiness, but the fullness of your own essential nature, not exile, but homecoming to the truth of who you have always been, beneath all the masks and adaptations of your social self. From the ashes of all that you once believed yourself to be, a flame begins to kindle. Not the desperate fire of ego seeking attention or validation, but the steady, inextinguishable flame of authentic being that has been waiting beneath layers of conditioning, adaptation, and compromise for the moment when it could finally burn with its own true light. This is the fire that consumes everything false while leaving everything essential intact. The sacred conflagration that transforms the lead of borrowed identity into the gold of genuine self-expression. The masks you have worn so skillfully, so unconsciously, for so many years begin to feel like they are made of paper held too close to flame. The personas that once seemed so necessary for navigating the complex demands of family, career, and social expectation suddenly feel suffocating, restrictive garments that no longer fit the expanding truth of who you are becoming. Each time you try to slip back into these familiar roles, you feel the heat of inner conflict, the friction between what you are pretending to be and what you actually are. The fire of authenticity does not announce itself with grand proclamations or dramatic gestures. It begins as a quiet burning in the core of your being, a warmth that spreads slowly through your consciousness until every thought, word, and action is touched by its transforming heat. You notice it first in small moments, the way you can no longer laugh at jokes that demean others, the way certain conversations feel like they are happening in a language you no longer speak, the way your body rebels against activities and commitments that violate your emerging sense of truth. This flame burns away the accumulated debris of a lifetime's worth of shoulds and supposed tos, those inherited expectations and borrowed dreams that you mistook for your own authentic desires. Layer by layer, like an archaeologist of the soul, you begin to uncover the original blueprint of your being, the unique pattern of gifts, talents, and purposes that has been waiting beneath the sediment of social conditioning for its moment of emergence into the light. The shadow aspects of your personality, those rejected and denied parts of yourself, begin to reveal themselves not as enemies to be conquered, but as sources of vital energy that have been locked away by your commitment to maintaining socially acceptable facades. The anger you were never allowed to express becomes the fierce passion that fuels your commitment to justice. The selfishness you were taught to suppress becomes the healthy self-regard necessary for authentic self-care and boundary setting. The wildness you learned to tame becomes the creative force that breathes life into your genuine expression. Your voice, that unique vibrational signature through which your soul speaks itself into existence, begins to change as the fire of authenticity burns away the layers of vocal adaptation and accommodation you developed to fit in, to please, to avoid conflict or rejection. You hear yourself speaking truths you didn't know you possessed, expressing perspectives that surprise even you with their clarity and conviction. Words become less like tools for managing social impressions and more like sacred offerings, honest expressions of your inner landscape shared as gifts with those ready to receive them. The creative impulses that may have been dormant or misdirected for years suddenly ignite with new intensity and focus. Art, writing, music, dance, entrepreneurial ventures, innovative solutions to old problems. Whatever form your creativity takes, it now burns with the authenticity of genuine inspiration rather than the forced effort of trying to produce something impressive or marketable. You create not to be seen or appreciated by others, but because the fire within you demands expression, because your soul has things to say that can only be communicated through the unique vessel of your individual gifts and talents. The fire of authentic expression creates what Jung called an enantiodromia, a reversal into the opposite. What once felt like weaknesses reveal themselves as hidden strengths. What seemed like limitations become the very constraints that focus your energy into powerful and specific channels of expression. The wounds you carried for so long transform into sources of wisdom and compassion that enable you to serve others who are walking similar paths of healing and awakening. Your relationships begin to reorganize themselves around this new flame of authenticity burning at your center. Some connections built primarily on shared pretenses or mutual accommodation of each other's masks begin to feel strained and artificial. Others, perhaps dormant for years, suddenly rekindle as you discover deeper levels of genuine compatibility and understanding. New relationships enter your life that seem drawn by the authentic frequency you are now broadcasting. Connections based on truth rather than convenience, depth rather than surface compatibility. The persona, that carefully crafted social identity, does not disappear entirely but becomes more conscious and flexible. You learn to wear different aspects of your personality, like clothing appropriate to different situations, but always with awareness, always with choice, never losing touch with the core flame of authentic being that burns steadily beneath all social adaptations. You become an actor who is fully conscious of playing roles, while never forgetting their true identity. Your professional life may undergo radical transformation as the fire of authenticity burns away career choices made primarily for security, status, or social approval, rather than genuine calling and passion. You may find yourself drawn to work that directly expresses your authentic gifts and serves your deeper values, even if such work offers less conventional security or prestige. The question changes from, "What should I do to be successful?" to, "How can I serve the world through the unique gifts that are mine to offer?" The fire burns away the false humility and self-deprecation that may have been part of your adaptive strategy for avoiding threatening others or drawing unwanted attention to your gifts. You begin to own your talents, abilities, and insights, not from ego inflation, but from a simple recognition of what is actually true about your nature. This is not arrogance, but accuracy, the humble acknowledgement of your authentic capacities and the responsibility that comes with them. Your relationship with your body transforms as the fire of authenticity burns away the layers of judgment, shame, and disconnection that separate you from the wisdom of your physical being. You begin to dress, move, and care for your body in ways that express rather than disguise your essential nature. Physical practices, whether exercise, dance, martial arts, yoga, or simple walking in nature, become expressions of your authentic self, rather than attempts to conform to external standards of health or beauty. The collective unconscious begins to work through you more directly as the fire of authenticity clears away the obstacles and resistances that previously blocked the flow of archetypal energies. Through your individual consciousness, you may find yourself spontaneously embodying qualities of the wise elder, the fierce warrior, the nurturing mother, the visionary artist, or other universal patterns of human potential that seek expression through particular individuals at specific moments in history. Your sexuality and intimate relationships are touched by this fire of authentic expression, burning away the layers of performance, accommodation, and unconscious role-playing that may have characterized your romantic connections. You begin to relate to others from a place of genuine desire and authentic feeling, rather than from scripts inherited from family patterns, cultural expectations, or romantic fantasies derived from movies and novels. The fire reveals itself as both destructive and creative, destroying only what has outlived its usefulness, while nurturing and empowering everything that serves your authentic development. Fear, shame, guilt, and other emotional patterns that once constrained your self-expression are consumed by this flame, while courage, joy, compassion, and creative passion are fed and strengthened by its heat. Your relationship with money and material possessions undergoes transformation as the fire of authenticity burns away the consumer desires and status symbols that were driven more by image management than genuine appreciation or need. You find yourself drawn to possessions and experiences that directly support and express your authentic nature, while losing interest in acquisitions motivated primarily by social comparison or ego enhancement. The fire brings with it a fierce intolerance for anything that violates your emerging sense of truth and integrity. You can no longer participate in conversations, activities, or relationships that require you to betray your authentic nature. This is not rigidity or judgment, but a natural consequence of having tasted the freedom and joy of genuine self-expression. You simply cannot go back to the prison of pretense once you have experienced the liberation of truth. Your spiritual and philosophical beliefs are refined in the fire of authentic expression. Inherited religious ideas, borrowed philosophical positions, and adopted spiritual practices are either integrated more consciously or released entirely, depending on whether they actually serve your genuine development or merely provided social comfort and belonging. Your relationship with the sacred becomes more direct and personal, less mediated by external authorities and traditional formulations. The fire of authenticity creates what mystics have called the incorruptible body, not a physical immortality, but a quality of being that cannot be diminished or contaminated by external circumstances. When you are aligned with your authentic nature, expressing your genuine gifts, living according to your deepest values, you become like a flame that cannot be extinguished by wind, rain, or the attempts of others to diminish your light. Your capacity for leadership and influence expands naturally as the fire of authentic expression burns brightly within you. People are drawn to authenticity like moths to flame, recognizing in your genuine self-expression a permission and inspiration for their own journey toward truth. You become a catalyst for others' awakening, not through preaching or teaching, but simply through the magnetic power of being genuinely yourself. The fire burns away the neurotic patterns and psychological defenses that once consumed so much of your energy. Anxiety decreases as you no longer need to maintain elaborate pretenses. Depression lifts as you reconnect with your authentic sources of meaning and purpose. Anger transforms from destructive reactivity into constructive passion for justice and truth. Your artistic and creative expressions take on a quality of inevitability and naturalness that they may have lacked when they were driven more by ego ambition than authentic inspiration. Whether you paint, write, dance, cook, garden, teach, heal, or express creativity through any other medium, your offerings now carry the unmistakable signature of genuine authenticity that touches others at a soul level. The fire of authentic expression reveals itself as connected to what Jung called the self, that central organizing principle of the psyche that seeks to express its unique pattern of wholeness through your individual life. This is not self-expression in the narcissistic sense of ego inflation, but self-expression in the truest sense, allowing the deeper self to live itself through your thoughts, words, and actions. Your relationship with aging and mortality is transformed by this fire of authenticity. Instead of fearing the passage of time and the approach of death, you begin to feel a sense of urgency about fully expressing your authentic nature while you have the opportunity to do so. Each day becomes precious, not because it might be your last, but because it offers another opportunity to live from truth, to express your genuine gifts, to contribute your unique verse to the great poem of existence. The fire burns away the addiction to approval and the fear of criticism that may have constrained your self-expression for years. You begin to understand that authentic expression inevitably provokes both appreciation and resistance, that living from truth means accepting that not everyone will understand or approve of your choices. This is not indifference to others, but freedom from the tyranny of needing everyone to validate your existence. Your dreams and visions of the future are ignited by this fire of authenticity. Instead of imagining yourself achieving greater success within existing paradigms, you begin to envision entirely new possibilities that could only emerge through your unique combination of gifts, experience, and perspective. You become a creator of new realities rather than merely a participant in existing ones. The fire of authentic expression ultimately reveals itself as the emergence of what you have always been, beneath all the layers of adaptation and accommodation. Not something new that you are becoming, but something eternal that you are finally allowing yourself to be. This flame has been burning quietly in the depths of your being since the moment of your birth, waiting for the conditions that would allow it to illuminate your entire existence with the light of genuine truth. In the full flowering of authentic expression, you discover that the fire that burns within you is connected to the same flame that burns at the heart of all existence, the creative force that drives the evolution of consciousness, the light that seeks to know itself through infinite forms of expression, the love that weaves all separate beings into the unified tapestry of being. Your individual authenticity becomes a unique note in the cosmic symphony, irreplaceable and essential, a gift that only you can offer to the grand celebration of existence, expressing itself through countless forms of beauty, truth, and creative possibility. There comes a moment in the soul's journey when the very ground beneath your feet begins to tremble, not with destruction, but with the tremor of new life stirring beneath the surface of everything you thought you knew. You stand at the threshold of a profound recognition, one that will shatter the comfortable illusions of linear progress and invite you into the sacred dance of paradox that lies at the heart of all becoming. For so long you have lived in the realm of either-or, believing that strength must exclude vulnerability, that wisdom must banish uncertainty, that growth must always mean moving forward and never looking back. The ego, in its desperate attempt to create order from chaos, has constructed a world of false dichotomies, light opposing dark, conscious opposing unconscious, holding and opposing, letting go. But now, as you venture deeper into the landscape of your own psyche, you discover that the soul speaks a different language entirely, one written in the grammar of paradox and the syntax of mystery. The ancient alchemists knew this secret well. They understood that the opus contra naturam, the work against nature, was not a battle to be won, but a tension to be held. In their cryptic symbols and obscure texts, they encoded the fundamental truth that transformation occurs not through the resolution of opposites, but through their creative union. The marriage of sun and moon, king and queen, sulfur and mercury. These were not mere chemical processes, but profound psychological realities, maps of the soul's journey toward wholeness. And so you find yourself standing in this liminal space, this threshold between worlds, where the old certainties have crumbled, but the new understanding has not yet crystallized into form. It is here, in this uncomfortable between space, that the real work begins. For you are learning to hold what the rational mind insists cannot be held, to embrace both sides of the paradox without collapsing into the false comfort of choosing one over the other. Consider the paradox of strength and vulnerability. The ego has taught you that strength means impenetrability, that to be vulnerable is to be weak, that showing your wounds is a sign of failure. But as you descend deeper into the caverns of your own being, you discover something that defies all logic. It is precisely in the moments of greatest vulnerability that your truest strength emerges. Like a tree that bends in the storm rather than breaking, you learn that flexibility is not weakness but the highest form of resilience. The wound becomes the birthplace of wisdom. The crack in your armor becomes the opening through which light enters. The very things you have spent a lifetime trying to hide or heal become the doorways to your deepest power. This is not the strength of the warrior who conquers, but the strength of the sage who surrenders, not to defeat, but to a deeper understanding of what it means to be fully, authentically human. In the realm of knowledge and wisdom, another paradox reveals itself with stunning clarity. The more you learn, the more you realize how little you know. The more you understand about the nature of existence, the more mysterious it becomes. This is not the ignorance of the uninitiated, but the sacred unknowing of those who have traveled far enough into the depths of reality to glimpse its infinite complexity. Socrates understood this when he declared that his wisdom lay in knowing that he knew nothing. The Zen masters pointed to it with their koans and their empty cups. You discover that true wisdom is not the accumulation of facts or the mastery of concepts, but the cultivation of a particular quality of awareness, one that remains open to mystery, comfortable with uncertainty, and humble before the vastness of what cannot be grasped by the rational mind alone. This wisdom blooms in the soil of unknowing, like a flower that draws its nourishment not from what is certain, but from what remains forever beyond the reach of final understanding. The paradox extends into the very process of growth itself. You learn that authentic development requires both holding on and letting go, often simultaneously. There are aspects of yourself that must be preserved, honored, and strengthened. The essential core of your being, the unique spark of individuality that makes you who you are. Yet there are also patterns, beliefs, and identities that must be released, composted, transformed. The art lies not in choosing one over the other, but in developing the discernment to know which is which, and the wisdom to act accordingly. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of the individuation process, learning to trust your own inner knowing about what serves your highest development and what keeps you trapped in outdated patterns. The collective voice of society, family, and culture will always be there, offering its opinions about who you should be and how you should live. But deep within the sanctuary of your own soul, there is another voice, quieter but infinitely more trustworthy, that knows the way forward even when the path is shrouded in uncertainty. As you learn to navigate these paradoxes, something remarkable begins to happen. The rigid structures of either-or thinking start to soften and expand. Where once you saw only opposition, you begin to perceive complementarity. Where once you experienced conflict, you start to recognize the creative potential that lies dormant within tension itself. This is the birth of what Jung called the transcendent function, the psychological capacity to hold opposing forces in creative tension without being torn apart by their apparent contradiction. The transcendent function is not a philosophical concept to be understood, but a living reality to be embodied. It emerges from the depths of the psyche when the conscious mind finally learns to stop its relentless attempts to resolve every paradox and instead learns to dance with mystery itself. It is the development of a new kind of consciousness, one that can embrace both rational understanding and intuitive knowing, both careful planning and spontaneous response, both individual will and surrender to something greater than the personal ego. This capacity develops slowly, like a muscle that grows stronger with use. At first, holding tension feels almost unbearable. The mind rebels against the ambiguity, demanding resolution, clarity, a definitive answer. But gradually, as you practice staying present with the discomfort of not knowing, something shifts. The tension itself becomes a source of energy, a creative force that generates new possibilities. You discover that many of life's most profound insights arise not from solving problems, but from learning to live fully within them. The paradox of becoming reveals itself most clearly in the relationship between effort and surrender. There are times when growth requires tremendous effort, the disciplined work of self-examination, the courage to face uncomfortable truths, the persistence to continue when progress seems impossible. Yet there are also times when growth occurs only through surrender, releasing the need to control outcomes, trusting processes that operate beyond conscious understanding, allowing transformation to unfold in its own time and way. Learning when to push and when to yield, when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to remain silent. This becomes an art form, a delicate dance with the rhythms of your own psyche. It requires developing what might be called a sophisticated sensitivity, an ability to read the subtle signals that indicate which approach is needed in any given moment. This sensitivity cannot be taught through rules or formulas. It must be cultivated through patient attention to the endless variations of your own inner landscape. The paradox extends into the realm of identity itself. As you progress along the path of individuation, you discover that becoming more truly yourself paradoxically requires letting go of many of the things you have identified as you. The persona, that carefully constructed mask you wear in social situations, begins to feel increasingly artificial. The roles you play, the opinions you hold, the preferences you express, all of these begin to be held more lightly, recognized as temporary costumes rather than eternal truths about your essential nature. Yet this is not a loss, but a liberation. As the false identities fall away, what remains is both more substantial and more fluid than what came before. You discover an essential selfness that is simultaneously constant and ever-changing, like a river that maintains its identity while never being the same water from moment to moment. This paradox of stability and flux, of being and becoming, points to something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. The shadow, too, participates in this dance of paradox. What you have rejected and disowned about yourself does not simply disappear when brought into consciousness. Instead, it reveals its dual nature, simultaneously destructive and creative, simultaneously a source of suffering and a reservoir of untapped potential. The anger you have suppressed may indeed be destructive when unconscious, but it may also contain the energy needed to establish healthy boundaries. The sadness you have avoided may be overwhelming when unexpressed, but it may also be the doorway to profound compassion and empathy. Integrating the shadow is not about becoming nice or good in any conventional sense. It is about becoming whole, which includes accepting and transforming all aspects of your humanity. This process requires a kind of moral courage that goes beyond simple rule-following or people-pleasing. It demands that you develop your own ethical compass, one that can navigate the complex territory where conventional morality may not provide clear guidance. The feminine and masculine principles within your psyche also reveal their paradoxical nature. Traditional thinking would have you believe that these are opposing forces, that strength lies in identifying with one and rejecting the other. But the deeper truth is that wholeness requires the integration of both, the receptive and the active, the intuitive and the analytical, the yielding and the assertive. This is not about gender in any biological sense, but about fundamental qualities of consciousness that exist within every human being, regardless of their physical form. Learning to access both the masculine drive toward differentiation and achievement and the feminine capacity for relationship and receptivity expands your range of possible responses to life's challenges. You become more flexible, more creative, more capable of responding appropriately to whatever circumstances arise. This integration is not a one-time achievement, but an ongoing process, a continuous balancing and rebalancing as life presents new situations that call forth different aspects of your being. The paradox of time reveals itself as particularly relevant to the individuation process. Linear time suggests that growth happens in a straight line, that you start at point A and gradually progress to point B. But psychological time operates by entirely different laws. Growth often happens in spirals, returning to themes and challenges you thought you had already resolved, but encountering them now from a deeper level of understanding. What appears to be regression may actually be integration. What seems like stagnation may be incubation. The psyche has its own seasons, its own rhythms of expansion and contraction, of emergence and withdrawal. Learning to honor these natural cycles rather than forcing constant forward momentum becomes essential to healthy development. There are times for active growth and times for rest, times for reaching outward and times for turning inward, times for learning new things, and times for digesting what has already been learned. This organic understanding of time challenges the achievement-oriented mindset that dominates much of modern culture. Success in the individuation process cannot be measured by external standards or timetables. It unfolds according to its own inner logic, its own natural pace. Attempting to rush or force this process is not only ineffective but counterproductive, like trying to make a flower bloom by pulling on its petals. The paradox of solitude and connection emerges as another fundamental aspect of becoming whole. Individuation is inherently a solitary journey. No one can do the inner work for you. No one can face your shadow or integrate your unconscious contents or develop your unique potential. Yet this solitary work paradoxically enhances your capacity for authentic relationship with others. As you become more genuinely yourself, you become more capable of meeting others in their authentic selfhood rather than relating to them through projections, expectations, or roles. The person who has done their own inner work brings a quality of presence to relationships that is both deeply personal and transpersonal. They can be intimate without losing themselves, supportive without becoming codependent, honest without being cruel. They have learned the delicate art of being fully present to another while remaining rooted in their own center. This dance between solitude and connection continues. Throughout the individuation process, there are periods when withdrawal from social engagement becomes necessary for inner development. There are also periods when engagement with others is essential for testing and refining what has been learned in solitude. The ability to move fluidly between these modes, to know when solitude is needed and when connection is called for, becomes a crucial skill in navigating the path of becoming. The paradox of acceptance and change weaves through every aspect of this journey. True transformation begins with radical acceptance of what is, yet this acceptance paradoxically creates the conditions for authentic change. When you stop fighting against aspects of yourself or your circumstances, when you cease the exhausting struggle to be different than you are, a space opens up in which genuine transformation becomes possible. This is not passive resignation, but active embrace, a willingness to meet reality exactly as it presents itself, without the mediating filter of how you think it should be. From this place of full acceptance, change happens naturally, organically, like a seed that can only sprout when it stops trying to be anything other than what it is in this moment. The ego finds this paradox particularly challenging because its entire existence seems predicated on the project of self-improvement, on becoming something better, different, more perfect. But the deeper wisdom of the psyche reveals that the very attempt to improve or fix yourself often reinforces the problem it seeks to solve. It is only when you can fully accept yourself, including your neuroses, your wounds, your limitations, that real healing and transformation become possible. As these paradoxes begin to live themselves through you, rather than being merely understood intellectually, you notice a fundamental shift in your relationship to life itself. Where once you experienced yourself as separate from the world around you, struggling against forces beyond your control, you begin to sense your participation in a larger pattern, a cosmic dance in which you are both dancer and dance, both observer and observed. This is not a loss of individuality, but its deepest fulfillment. You discover that becoming fully yourself paradoxically reveals your essential unity with all existence. The boundaries between self and other, inner and outer, sacred and mundane, begin to shimmer and become permeable. You remain distinctly yourself while simultaneously participating in something infinitely larger than your personal identity. This emergent awareness brings with it a profound sense of both responsibility and freedom. You recognize that you are co-creating the reality you inhabit, that your consciousness is not merely a passive receiver of experience, but an active participant in shaping what unfolds. Yet this recognition comes without the burden of believing you must control everything, for you have learned the paradox that true power lies in knowing when not to exercise it. The transcendent function continues to develop, allowing you to hold increasingly complex paradoxes with greater ease and grace. You become comfortable with ambiguity, at home with mystery, capable of acting decisively even when all the information is not available. This is not the confidence of the ego that believes it knows everything, but the confidence of the self that trusts the intelligence of the whole, even when the part cannot comprehend the pattern. You are learning to think with your entire being rather than just your rational mind. Intuition, emotion, sensation, and intellect begin to work together as an integrated intelligence, each contributing its unique perspective to your understanding of any situation. This multidimensional awareness allows you to perceive subtleties and nuances that were previously invisible, to respond to life from a place of wholeness rather than fragmentation. The creative principle becomes increasingly active in your life as you learn to dance with paradox. Creativity, after all, is the ability to bring something new into existence by combining elements in novel ways, by finding connections between things that seemed unrelated, by allowing opposites to fertilize each other and give birth to something unprecedented. As you become more comfortable with paradox, you become more creative in every aspect of your existence. This creativity is not limited to artistic expression, though it may certainly include that. It manifests as creativity in problem solving, creativity in relationships, creativity in how you structure your time and energy, creativity in how you respond to challenges and opportunities. Life itself becomes a creative medium, and you become increasingly skilled at improvising your way through its endless variations. The paradoxes you are learning to embody are not merely personal psychological phenomena, but reflections of fundamental patterns that operate throughout all existence. The ancient Chinese understood this with their concept of yin and yang, not as opposing forces, but as complementary aspects of a single dynamic whole. The Hindu tradition encoded it in the image of Shiva Nataraja, the dancing destroyer creator whose eternal dance maintains the cosmic order through constant creation and destruction. As you become more conscious of these universal patterns, you begin to recognize them everywhere, in the cycles of nature, in the rhythms of your own body, in the ebb and flow of relationships, in the rise and fall of civilizations. This recognition brings a sense of participating in something sacred, something that extends far beyond the boundaries of your individual existence, while simultaneously finding its unique expression through your particular form of consciousness. The journey of learning to dance with paradox is never complete, for life continues to present new tensions to be held, new opposites to be integrated, new mysteries to be lived rather than solved. Each stage of development brings its own particular paradoxes, its own unique challenges in learning to hold complexity without being overwhelmed by it. But what changes is your relationship to this ongoing process. Where once paradox felt threatening to your sense of stability and identity, it now feels like an invitation to deeper engagement with the mystery of existence itself. You begin to welcome the tension, to see it as the creative force that keeps life dynamic and prevents consciousness from stagnating in any fixed position. This is the beginning of wisdom, not the accumulation of knowledge or the mastery of techniques, but the development of a fundamental capacity to remain present and responsive to whatever life presents. Whether it conforms to your expectations or challenges everything you thought you knew. It is the wisdom of the empty cup that can be filled, the open hand that can both give and receive, the receptive heart that can embrace both joy and sorrow without being destroyed by either. As this chapter of your journey draws to a close, you stand transformed by your encounter with paradox. You are no longer the same person who began this exploration, yet you are more deeply yourself than ever before. You have learned to hold tension creatively rather than resolving it prematurely. You have developed the transcendent function that allows consciousness to move fluidly between different levels of reality without getting stuck in any single perspective. The paradox of becoming has revealed itself as not merely a psychological concept, but a living reality that you embody with every breath, every choice, every moment of conscious awareness. You have become a bridge between worlds, a conscious participant in the eternal dance of opposites that gives birth to all existence. And in learning to dance with paradox, you have taken a crucial step toward the wholeness that is both your birthright and your destiny. There comes a time in every soul's journey when the forward motion must cease, when the restless energy of becoming must surrender to a deeper calling from within. This is not the surrender of defeat, but the surrender of ripeness, the moment when the fruit can no longer cling to the branch, when the seed can no longer remain intact, when the caterpillar can no longer sustain the illusion of being anything other than raw material for a transformation so profound that it defies every rational understanding of what it means to exist. You find yourself drawn inexorably toward a kind of withdrawal that feels both terrifying and inevitable. The outer world, with all its demands and distractions, begins to feel increasingly distant, as if you are viewing it through layers of gauze or from the bottom of a deep, still pool. This is not depression, though it may be mistaken for such by those who observe from the outside. This is not regression, though it may appear as a retreat from the progress you have made. This is the chrysalis moment, the sacred time of dissolution that precedes every genuine transformation. The alchemists understood this phase intimately, calling it the negredo, the blackening, the necessary death that must occur before new life can emerge. In their cryptic texts and symbolic illustrations, they depicted this stage as a descent into darkness, a return to the prima materia, the original matter from which all things arise and to which all things must return before they can be reborn in a higher form. They knew that transformation is never merely additive. It is not simply a matter of acquiring new qualities or abilities while leaving the old structure intact. True transformation requires a fundamental dissolution of what has been, a composting of the old self into the fertile darkness from which the new self can emerge. As you enter this chrysalis state, the familiar landmarks of your identity begin to shimmer and dissolve. The roles you have played, the stories you have told about yourself, the beliefs and opinions that have given your life structure and meaning, all of these begin to feel strangely insubstantial, like costumes that no longer fit or scripts that no longer resonate with your deepest truth. This dissolution can be profoundly disorienting, for the ego has invested enormous energy in constructing and maintaining these structures of identity. The rational mind rebels against this process, desperately trying to reassemble the familiar patterns, to restore the sense of solidity and continuity that has provided psychological security. But something deeper than the rational mind is at work here, something that operates according to laws that the conscious ego cannot comprehend or control. This is the wisdom of the self, the archetypal center of wholeness that orchestrates the process of individuation from depths that remain forever mysterious to ordinary consciousness. In the chrysalis, the caterpillar does not simply grow wings and learn to fly. The entire structure of its being must first dissolve into what biologists call imaginal soup, an undifferentiated cellular matrix that bears no resemblance to either the caterpillar that was or the butterfly that will be. For a time, there is neither caterpillar nor butterfly, only this primordial substance pulsing with potential, guided by imaginal cells that carry the template for the new form but cannot manifest it until the old form has been completely dissolved. This biological metaphor points to a profound psychological reality. In the chrysalis moment of human transformation, you too must dissolve into your own version of imaginal soup. The carefully constructed ego structure must liquefy, must return to the primordial darkness of the unconscious, where new patterns of consciousness can coalesce. This is why the chrysalis phase feels so disorienting. You are no longer who you were, but not yet who you are becoming. You exist in that liminal space between death and birth, between ending and beginning, between the exhale and the inhale of existence itself. The protective darkness of withdrawal becomes essential during this phase. Just as the caterpillar must encapsulate itself in a shell that shields the transformation from external interference, you too must create sacred space around this process of inner dissolution and regeneration. This may manifest as a need for solitude that others find difficult to understand, a withdrawal from social obligations and external activities that once seemed important, a turning inward that can appear selfish or antisocial to those who remain identified with the world of outer achievement and engagement. But this withdrawal is not escape, it is incubation. In the depths of solitude, away from the constant input and demands of the external world, subtle processes of transformation can unfold that would be impossible in the bright light of ordinary consciousness. Like seeds that must be buried in the dark earth before they can sprout, like wine that must ferment in sealed vessels before it can achieve its full complexity and depth. The new self must ripen in the protective darkness of withdrawal before it can emerge into the light of conscious expression. This process operates largely beyond the reach of conscious awareness, just as the caterpillar has no conscious knowledge of what is happening during its time in the chrysalis. You may experience this as a sense of emptiness, of not knowing who you are or what you want, of feeling disconnected from the passions and purposes that once drove you forward. The goals that once seemed so important may lose their compelling power. The relationships that once defined you may feel strangely distant. Even your own emotions may seem muted, as if experienced through a thick fog. This apparent emptiness is actually fullness, the fullness of potential that has not yet differentiated into specific forms. It is the pregnant void from which all creation emerges, the fertile darkness that holds within itself the seeds of infinite possibility. But because the conscious mind is accustomed to defining itself in terms of specific content, particular thoughts, feelings, desires, and identities, this state of pure potential can feel like a kind of death, a loss of everything that once seemed to matter. The temptation during this phase is to rush the process, to try to force the emergence of the new self, before the dissolution of the old is complete. The ego, uncomfortable with the uncertainty and apparent emptiness, may grasp desperately at any thread of the former identity, trying to reassemble the familiar patterns before they have been fully composted into the raw material for transformation. Or it may try to manufacture a new identity through willpower and conscious effort, not understanding that genuine rebirth cannot be forced but must unfold according to its own inner timing and logic. Patience becomes the most crucial virtue during the chrysalis moment. This is not the passive patience of resignation, but the active patience of trust. Trust in processes that operate beyond conscious understanding. Trust in the wisdom of the self that orchestrates transformation from depths that the ego cannot fathom. Trust in the fundamental intelligence of existence that knows how to transform a caterpillar into a butterfly without any conscious intervention or guidance from the creature undergoing the change. This trust must be cultivated despite the apparent evidence that nothing is happening, that the process has stalled, that you are stuck in a liminal space between what was and what will be. The chrysalis phase often feels like stagnation from the perspective of ordinary consciousness, because the most significant changes are happening at levels so deep that they remain invisible to normal awareness. Like the slow formation of a pearl within the protective shell of an oyster, or the gradual crystallization of minerals in the hidden chambers of the earth. The most profound transformations occur in darkness and silence, far from the observing eye of the conscious mind. Dreams become particularly important during this phase, serving as messengers from the unconscious depths where the real work of transformation is taking place. The images that arise in sleep may be strange and incomprehensible to the rational mind, full of symbols and metaphors that seem to bear no relationship to ordinary waking experience. But these dreams are not random neurological firing. They are communications from the self, glimpses into the alchemical laboratory where the old self is being dissolved and the new self is being formed. Pay attention to dreams of death and birth, of descent into underground spaces, of dissolution and reconstitution, of being lost in dark forests or floating in primordial waters. These images are not to be interpreted literally, but understood symbolically as representations of the transformation process itself. They are the psyche's way of preparing the conscious mind for changes so fundamental that they cannot be grasped through ordinary conceptual thinking. The body, too, participates in this process of dissolution and renewal. You may experience unusual fatigue, a need for more sleep than usual, changes in appetite or eating patterns, a general sense of physical heaviness or inertia. These are not symptoms of illness, but signs that the transformation is affecting every level of your being, not just the mental and emotional structures of identity, but the very cellular matrix of your physical existence. Honor these bodily needs without judgment or resistance. The chrysalis phase requires enormous energy, even though this energy is directed inward rather than outward, toward dissolution and regeneration rather than action and achievement. Just as the caterpillar must accumulate sufficient energy reserves before it can undergo metamorphosis, you too must allow your energy to gather and concentrate for the profound work of inner transformation. Relationships during this phase can become particularly challenging, for you are not the person others have known you to be, yet you are also not yet the person you are becoming. Friends and family members may feel confused or threatened by your withdrawal, interpreting it as rejection or abandonment. They may pressure you to snap out of it, to return to your former self, not understanding that such a return is not only impossible, but would actually prevent the very transformation that your soul is seeking to undergo. Some relationships may not survive this chrysalis period, for they were based on connection to aspects of your identity that are now dissolving. This can be profoundly painful, but it is also necessary. Just as the butterfly cannot return to its caterpillar relationships, it can no longer relate to the world in the same way. You too may find that some connections must be released to make space for new forms of relationship that will be possible once your transformation is complete. Other relationships may deepen during this time, particularly those with people who have themselves undergone similar processes of fundamental change. These individuals can serve as midwives to your transformation, offering the kind of understanding and support that comes only from direct experience of the chrysalis process. They know that sometimes the greatest gift you can offer someone in transformation is simply to bear witness to their process without trying to fix, change, or accelerate it. The spiritual dimensions of existence often become more vivid during the chrysalis moment, perhaps because the usual barriers between conscious and unconscious, personal and transpersonal, have been dissolved by the transformation process. You may find yourself more sensitive to synchronicities, more aware of the subtle energies that connect all things, more open to experiences that transcend the boundaries of ordinary rational understanding. This is not escapism, but a natural consequence of the dissolution of the rigid ego structures that normally filter and limit perception. Ancient wisdom traditions have always recognized these transitional periods as sacred times requiring special care and attention. The vision quest of Native American cultures, the retreat practices of Buddhist and Hindu traditions, the hermitage periods of Christian mystics, all of these acknowledge that there are times when withdrawal from ordinary social engagement is not only appropriate but essential for spiritual and psychological development. In our modern world, which places such high value on constant activity, productivity, and social engagement, the chrysalis moment is often pathologized or misunderstood. People experiencing this natural phase of transformation may be pressured to seek treatment for depression, to medicate away the very emptiness and withdrawal that are necessary for the process of renewal. While genuine depression is a serious condition that may require professional support, it is crucial to distinguish between pathological states and the natural cycles of psychological transformation. The chrysalis moment has its own intelligence, its own timing, its own natural duration. It cannot be rushed or forced, but neither does it last forever. Like all natural cycles, it moves according to rhythms that are both mysterious and reliable. The dissolution will continue until it is complete, until every aspect of the old self that needs to be composted has been returned to the primordial darkness from which new life emerges. Signs of the approaching completion of this phase often begin to appear in dreams before they become visible in waking consciousness. You may dream of birth or emergence, of breaking through barriers, of ascending from underground spaces, of creatures emerging from cocoons or eggs. These images herald the beginning of the next phase, when the new self that has been forming in darkness begins to press against the boundaries of the chrysalis, seeking its first tentative emergence into the light of conscious awareness. The first stirrings of the emerging self often feel fragile and tentative, like the barely perceptible movements of a chick beginning to break through its shell. There may be moments of sudden clarity or insight, brief glimpses of a new way of being that feels both foreign and deeply familiar. These initial emergences are precious and require careful protection. They are still too fragile to withstand the harsh light of ordinary consciousness or the critical judgments of the rational mind. As the chrysalis phase draws toward its close, you may experience a growing restlessness, a sense that the protective darkness that has been so necessary is now becoming confining. The very withdrawal that facilitated the transformation process now begins to feel limiting. This restlessness is not a sign that something is wrong, but rather an indication that the new self is ready to begin its emergence into the world. But emergence is itself a delicate process that requires patience and wisdom. The butterfly does not burst forth from the chrysalis fully formed and immediately ready for flight. It must first break through the protective casing, then slowly unfold and dry its wings, gradually testing its new form before it can take its first tentative flight. Similarly, the new self that has been formed in the darkness of withdrawal must be given time and space to unfold gradually, to test its new capacities, to learn how to inhabit and express its transformed nature. The temptation is to rush this emergence, to try to immediately integrate all the changes that have occurred during the transformation process. But just as forcing a butterfly to fly before its wings are ready would be destructive, trying to prematurely express the new self before it has had time to stabilize and orient itself can be counterproductive. The emergence from the chrysalis must unfold with the same organic timing that characterized the dissolution process itself. During this emergence phase, you may feel disoriented and uncertain, like someone waking from a long, deep sleep in an unfamiliar room. The world looks the same, yet everything seems different when viewed through the eyes of your transformed consciousness. Colors may appear more vivid, relationships may feel more authentic, creative impulses may flow more freely. Yet there is also a sense of awkwardness as you learn how to operate from this new center of being. This disorientation is natural and temporary. Just as a butterfly must learn to fly, you too must learn how to express and embody the transformed self that has emerged from the chrysalis of withdrawal. This learning process requires patience, practice, and often the support of others who can recognize and encourage the authentic self that is beginning to emerge. The chrysalis moment, when finally complete, leaves you fundamentally changed at the deepest levels of your being. You are not simply a better version of who you were before. You are a genuinely new creation, formed through a process of dissolution and reconstitution that has touched every aspect of your existence. The old fears and limitations have been composted into wisdom and compassion. The former patterns of reactivity have been transformed into conscious choice. The rigid structures of identity have been replaced by a fluid yet stable sense of authentic selfhood. This transformation is not merely psychological but ontological. It represents a change in the very nature of your being, a shift in the fundamental frequency at which your consciousness operates. You have become a different order of being, one that can no longer be contained within the limited structures that once defined your existence. Like the butterfly that can never return to being a caterpillar, you have crossed a threshold that can never be uncrossed, undergone a metamorphosis that has changed you at the most fundamental level of your existence. The chrysalis moment reveals itself, in retrospect, as one of the most sacred and necessary phases of the individuation journey. What felt like dissolution was actually consolidation. What seemed like emptiness was actually fullness. What appeared to be stagnation was actually the most profound form of progress, the kind that happens not through external movement, but through internal transformation so complete that it changes the very ground of being from which all external movement arises. As you emerge from this transformative darkness, you carry within yourself not just the memory of the chrysalis moment, but its living essence, the knowledge that transformation is always possible, that dissolution is not destruction, but renewal, that the apparent death of the old self is always the birth of something more beautiful, more authentic, more aligned with the deepest truth of who you are and who you are meant to become. In the depths of the chrysalis darkness, something begins to stir, not with the restless urgency of the ego seeking to reassemble its familiar patterns, but with the quiet majesty of deep authority recognizing its time has come. What emerges from the primordial soup of dissolution is not merely a reformed version of what was lost, but something altogether new and yet anciently familiar. The return of the rightful sovereign of the psyche, the self that has always existed but has been waiting in exile until the kingdom of consciousness was ready to receive its rule. This is not the democracy of ordinary awareness, where competing voices clamor for attention and influence. This is not the tyranny of the inflated ego, demanding that all of existence conform to its limited understanding. This is the emergence of authentic sovereignty, the natural authority that arises when all the scattered fragments of being recognize their proper relationship to the whole and willingly align themselves with the deeper intelligence that has always been guiding their dance, even when they were unconscious of its presence. The alchemists called this stage the rubedo, the reddening, when the scattered elements that had been dissolved in the negredo and purified in the albedo finally coalesce into the philosopher's stone, that mysterious substance that represents not just the transformation of base metals into gold, but the emergence of the immortal diamond body, the incorruptible essence of being that has been refined through fire and pressure into its most perfect form. But this metaphor, while beautiful, cannot capture the lived reality of what it means to experience the return of the exiled king within your own psyche. For this is not an abstract concept to be understood, but a concrete reality to be embodied. The moment when the fragments of yourself that have been wandering in the wilderness of projection, repression, and unconscious identification suddenly recognize their true home and begin the great pilgrimage back to wholeness. Consider how this return manifests in the realm of the shadow, those aspects of yourself that you have disowned, rejected, or simply failed to recognize as belonging to your essential nature. For so long, these exiled parts have lived as outlaws in the underground of your psyche, or have been projected onto others where they could be safely criticized, feared, or admired without being acknowledged as aspects of your own being. But now, as the new center of gravity establishes itself, these shadow elements begin to hear the call of home. The return is rarely gentle or convenient. Shadow material does not knock politely at the door of consciousness and wait for permission to enter. It erupts, seeps, crashes through the carefully maintained barriers of respectability and self-image with all the pent-up energy of something that has been held in exile for far too long. Dreams may be flooded with violent or sexual imagery that shocks the conscious mind. Emotions that have been suppressed for years or decades may surge to the surface with overwhelming intensity. Desires that contradict your carefully cultivated identity may demand recognition and expression. Yet something has fundamentally changed in your relationship to these returning elements. Where once you might have recoiled in horror or rushed to suppress them back into unconsciousness, you now find yourself capable of a different kind of response. The strengthened ego that has emerged from the chrysalis process is no longer so fragile that it needs to maintain its coherence by rejecting anything that challenges its self-image. The new center that has been established in the depths is vast enough to contain contradictions, strong enough to integrate opposites, wise enough to recognize that what appears destructive may actually be creative energy in disguise. This is not to romanticize the shadow or pretend that its integration is easy or comfortable. The returning shadow elements carry within them the pain of exile, the rage of rejection, the distortions that come from being forced to exist in the underground rather than in the light of consciousness. They may manifest initially as disturbing thoughts, inappropriate impulses, or explosive emotional reactions that seem to come from nowhere and belong to no one you recognize as yourself. But now you have the capacity to meet these exiled aspects with something more than mere resistance or acceptance. You can offer them the radical hospitality of genuine welcome, not because you approve of everything they represent, but because you recognize them as lost children of your own psyche, parts of yourself that have been carrying aspects of your unlived life, your unexpressed creativity, your undeveloped potential. The integration of shadow material is never simply a matter of letting it all hang out or acting on every impulse that arises. It requires the development of what the alchemists called the subtle body, a refined capacity to hold intense energies without being overwhelmed by them, to feel the full force of previously repressed emotions without being compelled to act them out destructively, to acknowledge the reality of your darker impulses while choosing consciously how to express or channel their underlying energies. This process of shadow integration creates space for the return of other exiled aspects of your being. The anima or animus, those contrasexual elements within the psyche that represent your capacity for receptivity and relationship, or your drive for achievement and differentiation, also begin to return from their places of exile or projection. For most people, these archetypal figures have been living unconsciously in romantic relationships, where they are sought in others rather than recognized as aspects of the self that need to be developed and integrated. The return of the anima or animus is often experienced initially as a profound longing or yearning that cannot quite be named or satisfied through external relationships. There is a sense of searching for something or someone who can complete you, make you whole, provide the missing piece of your identity. But as these inner figures begin to return home to consciousness, you discover that what you were seeking in others was actually a part of yourself that needed to be welcomed back into your own being. This recognition can be both liberating and deeply challenging. It means taking responsibility for developing qualities that you may have preferred to admire or depend upon in others. The man who has projected his anima onto women must learn to develop his own capacity for receptivity, emotional intelligence, and relational awareness. The woman who has projected her animus onto men must learn to develop her own capacity for assertiveness, analytical thinking, and independent action. This is not about becoming gender neutral or losing the natural polarities that create the dynamic tension of human existence. It is about becoming whole, developing the full range of human capacities within yourself, while still maintaining your unique individual expression of masculine and feminine energies. The integrated person is not bland or undifferentiated, but richly complex, capable of accessing both receptive and active qualities as circumstances require. The return of these projected aspects also transforms your capacity for authentic relationship with others. When you are no longer unconsciously seeking in others what you have failed to develop in yourself, when you are no longer projecting your unlived potential onto those around you, you become capable of meeting others in their own reality rather than through the filter of your unconscious needs and expectations. Relationship becomes a dance between two whole beings rather than an attempt by two half-people to create one complete person. The creative aspects of your nature also begin to return from exile during this phase of integration. Many people have relegated their creativity to weekend hobbies or nostalgic memories of childhood dreams, believing that artistic expression is impractical or self-indulgent. But creativity is not a luxury. It is one of the fundamental ways that the self expresses itself in the world, one of the primary channels through which the deep intelligence of the psyche communicates with ordinary consciousness. As the exiled king returns to his throne, creativity is recognized not as mere entertainment or self-expression, but as a sacred obligation, the responsibility to bring forth whatever unique gifts you carry, to express whatever particular combination of insights and capacities has been entrusted to your care. This may manifest as artistic creation in the traditional sense, but it is equally likely to emerge as creativity in living itself, the ability to approach each situation with fresh eyes, to respond to challenges with innovative solutions, to find novel ways of expressing love, wisdom, and service in the world. The return of creativity often brings with it a profound reorganization of priorities and values. Work that once felt meaningful may suddenly seem hollow or disconnected from your deeper purpose. Relationships that were based on convention or convenience may feel increasingly artificial. The opinions and approval of others may carry less weight as you become more attuned to the inner voice that knows what is authentic and what is mere performance. This reorganization can be disorienting for both you and those around you. Family members and friends may resist the changes they observe, preferring the predictable person you used to be to the more authentic but less controllable person you are becoming. Career paths may need to be altered or abandoned entirely as you align your external activities with your inner truth. Financial security may be temporarily compromised as you transition from living according to external expectations to following the guidance of your own inner authority. Yet there is a quality of inevitability to this process that makes resistance ultimately futile. The exiled king does not return as a supplicant seeking permission to reclaim his throne. He returns with the quiet confidence of one who knows his rightful place and will not be denied. This is not arrogance or inflation. It is the natural authority of the self, asserting its supremacy over the various partial identities that have been masquerading as the true center of your being. The experience of this inner authority can be both exhilarating and sobering. There is a sense of finally coming home to yourself, of no longer needing to apologize for who you are or pretend to be someone you are not. But there is also the weight of responsibility that comes with authentic power, the recognition that you can no longer blame your circumstances, your past, or other people for the quality of your life. The return of the exiled king means the end of victimhood and the beginning of conscious co-creation with the larger forces that shape existence. The hieros gamos, the sacred marriage of opposing forces within the psyche, begins to manifest as the various exiled aspects of your nature find their proper relationship to the central organizing principle of the self. This is not a marriage of convenience or compromise, but a union based on mutual recognition and respect. The conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, light and shadow, individual and universal. All these pairs of opposites begin to dance together in a dynamic harmony that generates creative energy rather than destructive conflict. This inner marriage transforms your relationship to conflict itself. Where once you experienced internal contradictions as problems to be solved or tensions to be eliminated, you now begin to recognize them as sources of creative energy. The friction between opposing desires, values, or impulses becomes a generator of new possibilities rather than a source of paralysis or confusion. You learn to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously without feeling compelled to resolve them into a single coherent position. You can feel both love and anger toward the same person, both excitement and fear about the same opportunity, both attachment and detachment toward the same outcome. These apparent contradictions no longer feel like signs of confusion or weakness, but like indicators of the rich complexity of human existence. The return of the exiled king also brings with it a new relationship to time and mortality. The ego, with its desperate need for permanence and control, lives in constant anxiety about death and impermanence. But the self exists in a different temporal dimension, one that encompasses both time and timelessness, both the personal biographical narrative and the eternal patterns that repeat themselves across generations and cultures. From this expanded perspective, Death is no longer the ultimate enemy to be feared and avoided, but simply one more transformation to be undergone when the time is appropriate. This does not mean becoming careless with life or cavalier about mortality, but rather developing the capacity to live fully in the present moment without being paralyzed by anxiety about future loss or past mistakes. The exiled king brings with him the memory of what you have always been, beneath the layers of conditioning, trauma, and false identification. This is not a regression to some imagined state of childhood innocence, but a return to the essential nature that exists prior to and beyond all the costumes and roles you have worn throughout your life. It is the part of you that has remained constant through all the changes, the still center around which all the movements of personality and circumstance have revolved. Recognizing this essential nature brings a profound sense of relief and homecoming. You realize that you have never actually been lost, despite all the times you felt confused or disconnected from yourself. You have never actually been broken, despite all the healing work you felt you needed to do. You have never actually been separate from the source of love and wisdom, despite all the searching and seeking that has occupied your spiritual journey. This recognition can initially be disorienting, for it calls into question many of the stories you have told about yourself and your life. If you were never actually lost, what was all that suffering about? If you were never actually broken, why did you need so much healing? If you were never actually separate, what was the spiritual journey for? The answer lies in the paradox of the spiritual path itself. The journey away from your essential nature was necessary in order for you to choose it consciously, rather than simply inherit it unconsciously. The exile of the king was required so that his return would be recognized and celebrated rather than taken for granted. The apparent separation from wholeness was the very mechanism by which wholeness could be realized and embodied rather than merely assumed. The return of the exiled king does not mean the end of growth, change, or challenge in your life. What changes is your relationship to these experiences, where once you met difficulties as a victim of circumstances beyond your control, you now engage with them as a conscious participant in your own becoming, where once you experienced problems as evidence of your inadequacy or bad luck, you now recognize them as opportunities for deeper integration and creative expression. The challenges that arise are no longer seen as obstacles to overcome, but as invitations to discover new aspects of your creative potential. The people who trigger your emotional reactions are no longer enemies to be defeated, but teachers offering lessons in acceptance, boundary setting, or compassion. The circumstances that disrupt your plans are no longer frustrations to be eliminated, but opportunities to practice flexibility, trust, and surrender to the larger intelligence that orchestrates the dance of existence. This shift in perspective does not eliminate suffering from your life, but it transforms the meaning and purpose of suffering. Pain becomes a teacher rather than an enemy. Loss becomes an invitation to discover what cannot be taken away. Failure becomes a doorway to humility and deeper understanding. Even illness and aging become opportunities to explore different dimensions of being and to practice letting go of attachments that limit your freedom. The exiled king returns not as a conqueror but as a servant, one who has learned through exile what it means to rule wisely and compassionately. This is power that seeks not to dominate but to liberate, authority that commands not through fear but through love, sovereignty that governs not through control, but through alignment with the natural order of things. As this new form of leadership establishes itself within your psyche, you may find that others begin to respond to you differently. There is a quality of presence that emerges from authentic self-possession that is both magnetic and liberating. People sense that you are no longer seeking their approval or needing them to complete you. and paradoxically, this makes them more drawn to you rather than less. Your capacity to stand in your own truth without defensiveness or aggression gives others permission to explore their own authenticity. This is not charisma in the conventional sense, which often masks insecurity or manipulation. This is the natural authority of someone who has done their inner work, who has faced their shadow and integrated their projections, who has learned to hold their own center while remaining open to connection with others. It is the presence of someone who has nothing to prove and nothing to hide because they have accepted themselves fully and completely. The return of the exiled king marks a crucial turning point in the individuation process, the moment when the work of integration begins to bear fruit in the form of authentic self-expression and conscious participation in life. What was once fragmented has become whole. What was once unconscious has become conscious. What was once projected has been reclaimed and integrated. Yet this is not an end but a new beginning. The returned king must now learn to rule wisely, to express his authority in service of the greater good, to use his power not for personal aggrandizement, but for the healing and transformation of the world. The individual who has achieved a significant degree of integration becomes a bridge between the conscious and unconscious, the personal and transpersonal, the human and the divine. The crown that the exiled king reclaims is not made of gold and jewels, but of consciousness itself, the awareness that recognizes its own essential nature while remaining fully engaged with the play of existence. This crown cannot be taken away by external circumstances because it is not dependent on anything outside itself. It is the natural radiance of being that has remembered itself, the spontaneous authority of love that has learned to express itself through human form. As this chapter of return draws to its close, you stand transformed not through the addition of something new, but through the recognition and integration of what was always already yours. The kingdom of your own consciousness has been restored to its rightful ruler, and all the provinces of your being, thought, emotion, sensation, intuition, creativity, relationship, service, now operate in conscious harmony rather than unconscious conflict. The exile is over, the wandering is complete, the fragments have come home to wholeness, and from this new center of integrated being, you are ready to engage with life not as someone seeking to become whole, but as someone expressing wholeness through the infinite creativity of conscious existence. You stand now at the threshold of a new kind of existence, having traversed the labyrinthine passages of your own becoming and emerged not as someone who has arrived at a final destination, but as someone who has learned to dance with the eternal process of transformation itself. The journey through shadow and chrysalis, through dissolution and return, has fundamentally altered not just who you are, but how you exist in the world. You have become something that defies the ordinary categories of human experience, a bridge between realms, a conscious participant in the great mystery that encompasses both the mundane and the sacred. This is the mark of individuation not as completion, but as conscious participation in incompletion. You have not solved the riddle of existence or transcended the human condition. Instead, you have learned to inhabit it fully, to embrace both its limitations and its infinite possibilities, to find profound meaning in the very uncertainty that once caused you such distress. You walk between worlds because you have discovered that there is no single world to which you belong entirely, no single identity that can contain the vast complexity of what you have become. The ordinary world continues to exist much as it always has, with its daily routines, its social conventions, its practical demands and concrete concerns. But your relationship to this ordinary realm has been fundamentally transformed. Where once you were either fully immersed in its assumptions or completely rejecting of its values, you now move through it with a quality of conscious participation that allows you to engage fully without losing yourself in identification. You can perform your work with dedication and skill while maintaining an awareness that your essential worth is not determined by your professional success or failure. You can participate in social gatherings with warmth and authenticity while recognizing that the personas being displayed, including your own, are temporary costumes rather than ultimate realities. You can attend to practical necessities with appropriate seriousness while remembering that even the most urgent human concerns exist within a larger context of cosmic becoming that relativizes their ultimate importance without diminishing their immediate relevance. This capacity for simultaneous engagement and detachment is not the result of emotional numbness or spiritual bypass. It emerges from a profound expansion of perspective that allows you to hold multiple levels of reality simultaneously. You can feel genuine sadness about loss while recognizing that impermanence is the natural order of existence. You can experience authentic joy in moments of beauty or connection while knowing that these experiences will pass. You can work diligently toward meaningful goals while remaining unattached to the specific outcomes of your efforts. The transcendent realm, that dimension of existence where archetypal patterns operate, where meaning reveals itself beyond the reach of rational explanation, where the sacred becomes accessible through symbol and synchronicity, is no longer a foreign country that you visit occasionally during moments of inspiration or desperation. It has become a natural part of your everyday awareness, accessible not through special techniques or altered states, but through the simple practice of remaining open to the deeper currents that flow beneath the surface of ordinary experience. Dreams continue to offer guidance and insight, but you no longer need to rely exclusively on sleep to access the wisdom of the unconscious. Waking life itself has become permeable to the symbolic dimension. A chance encounter, an unexpected delay, a broken object, a bird flying across your path. Any of these may carry meaning beyond their immediate practical significance. You have developed what might be called symbolic literacy, the capacity to read the deeper patterns that weave through the fabric of daily experience. This does not mean that you live in a state of constant mystical revelation, or that every random event is pregnant with cosmic significance. The discriminating intelligence that emerged through your individuation process allows you to distinguish between genuine synchronicity and mere coincidence, between authentic symbolic communication and the tendency to project meaning onto random occurrences. You have learned to be receptive to the deeper dimensions of experience without losing your grounding in practical reality. The movement between these different levels of awareness becomes as natural as breathing, an unconscious rhythm of expansion and contraction, of opening to the transcendent and returning to the immanent, of touching the eternal and engaging with the temporal. You discover that you can be fully present to a mundane conversation while simultaneously aware of the archetypal patterns being enacted through the interaction. You can attend to practical details with meticulous care while remaining connected to the larger purpose that gives meaning to the smallest actions. This fluid movement between worlds manifests most clearly in your relationship to other people. You have learned to see through the surface presentations of personality to the deeper struggles and aspirations that motivate human behavior. The person who triggers your irritation with their apparent selfishness may be recognized as someone desperately trying to meet unacknowledged needs for recognition or security. The colleague who seems arrogant or controlling may be seen as someone whose wounded masculine or feminine is attempting to restore balance through inappropriate means. This expanded perception does not make you naive about human psychology or oblivious to genuinely destructive behavior. If anything, your capacity to see through surface appearances makes you more skillful at discerning when someone is operating from their authentic center and when they are caught in unconscious patterns that may be harmful to themselves or others. But this discernment is held within a larger context of compassion that recognizes that everyone is doing the best they can given their current level of consciousness and their particular constellation of wounds and gifts. Your presence with others becomes a kind of invitation to authenticity, because you are no longer hiding behind your own defensive patterns or projecting your unconscious material onto those around you. You create space for others to drop their own masks and meet you from a more genuine place. This is not something you do deliberately or strategically. It is simply the natural effect of being in contact with someone who has learned to be comfortable with their own complexity and contradictions. Some people respond to this invitation with relief, grateful to encounter someone with whom they can be more honest about their struggles and uncertainties. Others may feel threatened by the implicit challenge to their carefully constructed presentations, preferring to maintain the comfortable distance that roles and personas provide. You learn to accept both responses without taking them personally, recognizing that each person must choose their own timing and degree of vulnerability. The work you engage with in the world, whether it is a traditional career, creative expression, service to others, or some combination of these, becomes a vehicle for expressing the integrated consciousness you have developed rather than merely a means of earning income or gaining recognition. There is a quality of authenticity and purposefulness to your engagement that transforms even routine activities into opportunities for creative expression and meaningful contribution. This does not necessarily mean that you abandon practical considerations or become indifferent to material needs. Rather, you learn to hold practical concerns within a larger framework of values and purposes that give deeper meaning to your choices. You may discover that work which once felt meaningful no longer aligns with your transformed understanding of yourself and your purpose, or you may find ways to bring greater consciousness and creativity to work that remains essentially the same in its external form, but is transformed in its inner significance. The creative principle becomes increasingly active in all areas of your life as you learn to approach each situation with fresh eyes rather than relying on automatic responses based on past experience. This creativity is not limited to traditionally artistic activities, but manifests as innovation in problem solving, originality in communication, inventiveness in relationship, and spontaneity in response to unexpected circumstances. You become someone who brings new possibilities into existence simply through your way of being in the world. Conversations become more interesting when you participate in them because you are not simply repeating familiar opinions or playing expected roles. Projects become more innovative when you contribute to them because you approach challenges from angles that others might not consider. Relationships become more alive when people engage with you because you are responding from your authentic center rather than from socialized patterns of behavior. The capacity for creative response extends to your relationship with difficulty and suffering. Where once you might have been overwhelmed by challenges or reactive to obstacles, you now approach problems with a kind of creative curiosity about what new understanding or capability they might be inviting you to develop. This is not denial of the reality of pain or difficulty, but a fundamental shift in how you relate to these inevitable aspects of human experience. Suffering becomes a teacher rather than simply an enemy to be defeated. Loss becomes an opportunity to discover what cannot be taken away, rather than merely a deprivation to be grieved. Failure becomes a doorway to humility and deeper understanding rather than simply evidence of inadequacy. This transformation of your relationship to difficulty does not eliminate pain from your life, but it prevents you from adding unnecessary suffering through resistance, victimization, or the demand that life conform to your preferences. The integration of your shadow has given you access to energies and capacities that were previously unavailable when those aspects of yourself were repressed or projected. The anger that you once tried to suppress may now be available as a source of energy for establishing boundaries or standing up for justice. The sadness that you once avoided may now serve as a wellspring of empathy and compassion. The sexuality that you once judged or denied may now contribute to a vibrant aliveness and creative energy that infuses all your activities. This integration does not mean acting out every impulse or indulging every desire, but rather having conscious access to the full spectrum of human energy and emotion. You can feel anger without being compelled to attack, experience desire without being driven to possess, encounter fear without being paralyzed by anxiety. The emotions and impulses that arise are recognized as information and energy rather than commands that must be obeyed or problems that must be solved. Your relationship to time itself has been transformed through this process of individuation. The ego's constant anxiety about the future and regret about the past has been replaced by a more complex relationship to temporality that includes both practical planning and present moment awareness, both historical understanding and visionary imagination. You can make reasonable preparations for the future while remaining unattached to specific outcomes. You can learn from past experiences without being trapped in old patterns or haunted by former mistakes. There is a quality of timelessness that permeates your experience, even as you remain fully engaged with the temporal world. Moments of deep connection, creative expression, or contemplative awareness seem to exist outside the ordinary flow of clock time. Yet this experience of eternity does not separate you from historical time, but enriches your engagement with it, allowing you to recognize the sacred within the mundane, the eternal within the temporal. The individuation process has revealed mortality not as the ultimate enemy to be feared and avoided, but as the creative constraint that gives urgency and poignancy to human existence. The awareness of death becomes a source of vitality rather than anxiety, reminding you to live fully in each moment because the number of such moments is finite. This is not a morbid preoccupation with death, but a healthy appreciation for the preciousness of life that emerges from accepting its temporary nature. You discover that the parts of yourself that most feared death, the ego identifications and attachments that seem so crucial to your sense of self, are indeed mortal and will pass away. But the essential nature that you have discovered through the individuation process exists in a different relationship to time and mortality. It participates in the eternal patterns that repeat themselves across generations and cultures, connecting you to something larger and more enduring than your personal biographical narrative. This recognition brings a profound sense of both responsibility and freedom. You are responsible for expressing whatever unique gifts and insights have been entrusted to your care during your brief tenure in human form. Yet you are free from the desperate need to make yourself permanent or to control outcomes beyond your immediate influence. You can contribute fully to the ongoing creation of the world while remaining unattached to whether your specific contributions will be remembered or recognized. The journey of individuation has not made you perfect in any conventional sense. You continue to make mistakes, to experience confusion and uncertainty, to struggle with limitations and challenges. But these imperfections are no longer experienced as failures or signs of spiritual inadequacy. They are recognized as natural aspects of the human condition, opportunities for continued learning and growth, reminders of your participation in the great mystery of existence rather than evidence of your separation from it. The conflicts and contradictions that continue to arise in your life are no longer seen as problems to be solved, but as creative tensions to be held and explored. You have developed the capacity to remain centered in the midst of uncertainty, to act decisively even when all the information is not available, to maintain equanimity in the face of praise or criticism. This is not the stoic indifference of emotional numbness, but the dynamic balance of someone who has learned to surf the waves of existence rather than being overwhelmed by them. Your relationships have been transformed by your capacity to meet others from your authentic center, rather than from your wounds, needs, or projections. You can offer genuine love and support without trying to fix or change people. You can receive love and care without losing your independence or taking on inappropriate responsibility for others' emotions. You can engage in conflict when necessary without making others wrong or defending yourself from imagined attacks. The love that flows through your relationships is not the possessive or dependent love of the ego, but the unconditional love of being itself, recognizing itself in all forms. This does not mean that you love everyone equally in terms of personal affection, or that you do not have preferences and boundaries. Rather, it means that your capacity for love is no longer limited by whether others meet your expectations or fulfill your needs. You have become a healing presence in the world, though this healing may happen so subtly that neither you nor those affected are consciously aware of it. Simply by being authentically yourself, by holding your own center while remaining open to connection, by responding from wisdom rather than reactivity, you contribute to the collective healing that the world so desperately needs. This is not grandiose thinking, but a recognition of how consciousness operates, how the transformation of individual awareness contributes to the transformation of the whole. The service that emerges from your individuation is not driven by guilt, obligation, or the need to prove your worth, but by the natural overflow of a life that has found its authentic center and purpose. You contribute to the world not because you should or must, but because you cannot help but express the love and wisdom that have become the foundation of your being. This service may take the form of your profession, your creative work, your relationships, your political engagement, or simply the quality of presence you bring to everyday encounters. You walk between worlds because you have discovered that there is ultimately only one world, a vast, interconnected web of consciousness expressing itself through infinite forms and phenomena. The ordinary and the sacred, the human and the divine, the personal and the transpersonal are recognized as different faces of a single mystery that cannot be grasped by the rational mind but can be lived and embodied through conscious participation. This recognition brings with it a profound sense of homecoming, not to a place but to a way of being, not to a final destination but to a quality of presence that can find itself anywhere and everywhere. You are at home in uncertainty because you have learned that not knowing is the natural state of a consciousness that remains open to infinite possibility. You are at home in change because you have discovered that your essential nature exists both within and beyond all the transformations you undergo. The individuation journey has revealed itself as not a path toward some idealized future state, but a way of walking through life with greater consciousness, authenticity, and love. Each moment offers an opportunity to choose awareness over unconsciousness, response over reaction, creation over repetition. Each encounter becomes a chance to practice the art of being fully human while remaining connected to the transpersonal dimensions that give life its deeper meaning. As you continue to walk between worlds, you carry within yourself the knowledge that transformation is always possible, that wholeness is always available, that love is always the deepest reality regardless of appearances to the contrary. You have become both student and teacher, both seeker and guide, both individual and universal. The journey continues, but it continues now from a place of rootedness in your own truth, openness to ongoing transformation, and trust in the wisdom of the larger process of which you are both product and participant. The dance of becoming continues, forever changing, yet forever constant, like a river that maintains its identity while never being composed of the same water from moment to moment. You are that river now, stable yet fluid, individual yet universal, finite yet eternal, walking between worlds, because you have learned that all worlds are expressions of the one consciousness that you are and have always been, now finally awakened to its own infinite nature and creative potential.